Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 2 of the King's Cup 2 Invitational Tournament. And with me today, I am joined by none other than our very own Red Sun. So, Red Sun, why don't you introduce
Hello,
yourself?
guys. Thanks for having me, James. King. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be casting alongside with you. It's a pleasure.
So, for those of you who are not that familiar with Red Sun is, of course, a moderator of the Discord, but more importantly, Red Sun is probably the most consistent streamer of cards out of all of us by far. So you should find him on Twitch, follow him there. Make sure you tune into his streams on it that happen again on a very regular basis. But he also has a YouTube channel where he does a monthly sort of edited together trip to Field Marshal video. That's a lot of fun. You should definitely check that out. Subscribe over there. Check out the backlog. But today, Red Sun is going to be joining me to help cast Week 2, Match 1 of the King's Cup. So, before we get into the players and the decks, we, of course, have, we have the scoreboard here. So here we can see the results of Week 1. So we had Baron Von Glower going up against Killswitch and Innocent Bubbles going up against Berto Burrito. And, of course, the players on the top of this scoreboard were the victors, but both games went to Game 7, so they were 4-3 victories with the very narrow margins separating these players. And what's important about scoring in this format is it's not simply about winning the set. It's actually about winning as many games as possible with as few losses as possible. So it's actually the game wins subtracted by the game losses plus the match wins, and that is your score. So you can see the score of 2. That is because they went +1 on the wins, and then they went on and won the actual match for +2 and then -1 for the losers. So this week, the first player we have here, or the first match we have here, is actually going to be Baron Von Glower versus Berto Burrito. That's what we're here today to cast. And that means Baron Von Glower, who won his first week, versus Berto Burrito, who lost his first week. This could potentially have a very big swing on the scoreboard, because if Baron just absolutely dominates this game, then it looks like he's the clear favorite. He's running away with it. But on the flip side, if Berto Burrito bounces back and wins this, then we're at a very level playing field. So, what do you think about what we saw in the first week, and sort of what are your expectations going into this?
So we saw some very, very close games last week. It's been a wild ride so far, and I'm hyped to see if whether Baron is able to solidify his lead that he's currently holding on the leaderboard, or if Berto Burrito is going to be able to flip the leaderboard around and take the lead today.
Yeah.
I am. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's yeah, we're definitely gonna have to see which of these two players is going to take the victory today. I also want to shout out at the beginning of the stream, we will be doing giveaways after the matches as we go through after each game, so be sure to enter the giveaway for your chance to win either 150 or 300 gold, which you can of course spend on anything you want, so players of any collection sizes, any point in their card's journey should join up, and to enter the giveaway, just type !giveaway in the Twitch chat, and you should be notified that you have entered. And I did remember to turn on the giveaway this time. I know there was an issue with that last week, but don't worry. !giveaway, you will enter the giveaway, and you can do !deck lists to get a link to the deck lists both for this week as well as last week, and you will see the deck lists for the players playing today as well as the players who will be playing in our next match. So if you want to get all the information, !deck lists. And now let's take a look at our format for this week, because after all, the way I've set up this tournament is that every single week the format changes, and that requires players to submit new decks, as well as it's going to require new innovations, and it's not simply just going to be reiterating on the exact same decks over and over and over. So the format that we're looking at for this week, unfortunately I forgot to update this overview card. So the first part of this is still accurate. This is, of course, a 3-week round robin, with the top 2 players after the 3 weeks going to the finals, and every match in the round robin is going to be bringing 5 decks, 1 ban, best of 7, first to win with all 4 of their decks. But for this week, It is true that no cards are allowed in multiple decks, so this means if a card is run in one deck, no matter how many copies, you are not allowed running that same card in any of your 4 other decks. You are allowed to bring the same nation multiple times. However, you are not allowed bringing the same cards from that nation multiple times. So, if you want to bring Germany, you are allowed to bring Germany multiple times, but you're only allowed running 35T in one of your decks. So that's a pretty big restriction. Also, reserved cards are allowed, so to broaden the pool of cards that the players are allowed to build their decks from. We're including all cards that have ever been printed in this game. And what is not mentioned here is that this week is Pauper. So Pauper is only standard or limited cards. So this is standard or limited cards across standard and the classic mode, but only standard or limited. So this is going to be quite the big shakeup from the previous week. Obviously, in the previous week, we saw Monty and Shelling eating bans in our first match, and then we saw Monty and Shelling deciding wins in our second match. So Monty and Shelling, those cards are gone. No Nakshubs, no Zukovs, no engineer battalions. It is only standard and limited cards, and this really changes the deck building around. I know you have tried your hand at some of these type of formats before. What do you think of Pauper? But also, what do you think of Pauper within these other deck building restrictions?
I love to see Pauper with the classic cards. So this allows for this definitely allows for some creative um, deck builds, and as we all know that like both Baron and Berto Burrito are exceptional deck builders, and I'm curious to see what their creative minds can come up with in this uh, very own, very special version of the Pauper format. I did try myself on some Pauper tournaments back in the early stages of the game. Let's not let's not talk about my Pauper experiences. Let's just look at what both these players came up with.
Yeah, and honestly, out of all of the formats, I think this is the one I'm the most excited to see how the no duplicate cards across decks works out. Because the problem with Pauper tournaments in the past is it's been absolutely dominated by just a handful of very specific cards. So, for example, in US, you would have, just 4 copies of California Regiment, 4 copies of Sherman, 3 copies of Fifth Rangers in every single deck, and those were just absolutely dominant because there were very few decks that could reasonably answer it, and really the only deck that could reasonably answer it was Britain, and if you were playing Britain, you just ran 3 Monsoon Rots and 4 Convoys, 3 Lend-Leases, and you just had infinite card draw and 3 full board wipes, and that's something that no other deck had. And you just put 3 Monsoon Rots in every deck that wasn't running 4 California regiments, and that was basically Pauper. That was like 99% of Pauper decks were running one of those two things. With this restriction, you can only run those cards in one deck, and with the ban, if you just put all of the good cards in a single deck, that deck is probably just going to eat the ban, and then you are forced to try alternate strategies in Pauper. And that's something I'm very excited for, because Pauper tournaments in the past have been completely and utterly dominated by just 2 or 3 different strategies. But that is enough about the format. Let's talk a little bit about the players. So, our first player here, we have Baron von Glower. Now, Baron is probably out of the 4 players we have here, he's the player who has played the least amount in cards tournaments, and in the tournaments he has played in, he has the overall lowest record. Despite that, he has finished second, and did make his way into an OCC Ultimate, where he went on to place in the top 4. So, he although he hasn't played a lot of tournaments, and that win rate in tournaments doesn't look too high, he has definitely done well in the past. But the reason he hasn't made a lot of tournaments or done well in these tournaments is he really loves building his own very creative decks rather than just simply copying what's currently meta. And, when you're talking about grinding out thousands of matches on ladder, or playing just like very rapid best of threes against Jagro and Bridair, that might not work out well, but in this format where it's best of 7 with these deck building restrictions, that's where Baron shines, and I think that's where we saw him come through in the first week, where he actually took it over Killswitch, who brought a very meta lineup, or as meta of a lineup you can get considering the restrictions. So yeah, that's Baron von Glower, and I think when we get to see his decks, he has definitely continued bringing that sort of interesting non-standard versions, even in such a non-standard format. But yeah, do you have anything else to add about Baron von Glower?
No, I can affirm everything that you just said. Baron is one of the most creative deck builders that I've met in the game. I mean his signature deck, the Siberian Transfer OTK. I kind of like. I think everybody's seen the deck. Everybody knows what the deck is capable of. What Baron as a player and deck builder is capable of. Yeah, I can't wait to see the list that he's come up with.
Yeah. But that's a lot about Baron, but he is coming up against none other than Berto Burrito here in week 2. And Berto Burrito, even though he fell in the final hurdle, Game 7 against Innocent Bubbles in week 1, I'm sure that he is back here to get back on top of the leaderboards because Berto Burrito is used to being on top of leaderboards. Because if you look at that 18 OCC appearances with 2 first place results, 56% win rate within tournaments. That is incredible. And yeah, Berto Burrito, I think, is a nice balance between identifying what's a very, very strong deck to build, or a strong deck to bring, and what makes a deck strong, but also balancing that with a certain amount of creativity that isn't going to see him necessarily fall for just like the simple trappings of meta decks that can be countered by very specific strategies. So yeah, Berto Burrito, very intellectual player when it comes to like building a lineup and figuring out his bands. But he's coming up against Baron von Glower, who is a very, very sort of abnormal lineup, abnormal player in the types of things he brings. How do you think Berto Burrito is going to be able to react to this? Do you think he's going to be rattled from that week 1, or do you think he's here to bounce back, regardless of what decks Baron is going to be throwing at him?
100% he's here to bounce back as hard as he can, as he possibly can. As I just mentioned a couple of minutes ago, these players are both exceptional deck builders, and we from his like past appearances in the OCC, we know experience shows like we know what Berto is capable of, as well as like also one of the most creative deck builders, and I think he's gonna prove once more why he's considered as such.
All right, well, we've talked a lot about the players, we've talked about the format, and we have danced around the decks a little bit, but now let us jump into the decks and start looking at the 10 different lists our players have here for us today. So, first up, we have Baron von Glower, and, I mean, his first list here, we've seen a lot of similar cards to some of the lists that he brought in the previous week, where it was just any cards, any rarity, any classic, any expansion, etc. And we saw he brought a very, very aggressive deck running War Productions and the 554th Rifles. Actually, sorry, it didn't run War Productions. It ran Iron from the Norths and the 554th because that was a German Soviet hyper aggro deck. And then he had a separate US-Japan hyper aggro deck. This is sort of balancing the two of them, and it is a US-Soviet hyper aggro deck, this time with War Productions as the only order in the deck, and that's going to potentially get him off to a very strong start. There's also a few wombo combos in here. Like turn 1, you can do 554th, push it to the front line, War Production, and then play one of these priests he runs in the deck to have it come down as a 3/3 artillery on turn 1. And again, this is a Pauper format. So in Pauper, there's a lot less efficient removal. There's a lot less efficient board clears. There's a lot less efficient just anything. It's a lot more just unit-to-unit trading, playing big health units, playing units with guard, and just hitting things into each other. So artillery and bombers are a premium in this format. Bombers are a little harder to use efficiently, but as we're going to look through these deck lists, we're going to see a lot more artillery than you would normally see in just a standard game of cards. And just starting with this list, 2 priests in there. You've got the 2 Katyushas, and then of course you have the scout cars to buff them. The 164ths can buff them, and then you just have the normal US Pauper shell of 4 Shermans, 3 5th Rangers, and interestingly, not running Californias. But if you look at the curve of this list, I think that is I think that's a correct decision. I think that's for the better. Yeah, this is a very, very aggressive list. What do you think of this?
I think it's interesting to see that wall production is making a comeback. I'm still kind of traumatized from the Jet season in December, where wall production was used to bring out these big units as fast as possible. Um, I'm curious to see how this will turn out with some of the bigger stuff that Baron is running in his list here. Um, like Fifth Rangers and also the Priest is kind of interesting. Um, because as you mentioned, like in this format, removal is kind of can be kind of scarce, right? And if that priest manages to stick around for a couple of turns, this can surely like develop into a problem pretty quickly if it's unanswered. And if this deck is consistently able to hold the front line, then it's going to be even harder for Berto to remove the priest.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, in Pauper, Pauper is traditionally a much slower format because a lot of the very, very aggressive cards are specials or elites, or they are decks that rely on special or elite forms of card draws or finishers to actually be a functional aggro deck. So aggro has been traditionally less popular in Pauper, so a lot of decks might be very, very slow, and if Baron just slams down even just a war production into an SU, that's a 5-3 tank on turn 1 that can hit face for 5 on turn 2. And, if your opponent's first play is on turn 4, you might just win the game because you hit face for 5 on turn 2, on turn 3, on turn 4, and then they play a guard, and then you play an M10 and hit face for 5 again, and you win the game. This is a very, very fast deck. And the other card I want to specially call out in this deck is the M4A3R3 Zippo. I don't think I have ever seen this card outside of draft. So for those who aren't aware, it's a 3-cost, 2/4 tank, 2 operation, and it says +4 attack against HQs and against infantry. So where this is going to be very, very powerful is getting through cards, particularly like Glamour Boys, because Glamour Boys are probably going to be very, very popular, I would imagine, being a standard card that sees a ton of play in just regular formats. So in Pauper, I'm sure it's going to see a ton of play. Zippo just trades with the Glamour Boys and then survives on the board. And with so much little chip damage and AoEs in Pauper, anything that can just value trade and stay on the board even at 1 health is going to stick around because it's a lot harder to deal 1 damage in this format than in other formats. So this is a potentially very powerful deck. And you're seeing like this creativity. There's a lot of cards that you would not normally see. And he could have just built a very standard frontline list with cards that have seen play in the past, with Blitzkriegs and Californias, but he's bringing a lot of these cards that have never really seen any play before, but you can see the thought behind it. It's not just simply bringing cards to be different. There is a thought, and there is a method to the madness. But now, let's look at his Japan Soviet deck, and this is a very, very spicy deck. So if you look at the curve of this deck, ton of 1-cost units. But if you're looking for the win condition of this deck, it is a burn deck. So 4 copies of that Tsuruga, which is destruction, deal damage to the enemy HQ equal to this unit's attack. And then you have, of course, counteroffensive with Winter Warfare to proc it, and honors. And basically the idea of this deck is you just try to burn out your opponent. There's not a lot of HQ gain in Pauper. I mentioned the Glamour Boys, but you can only run that in 1 deck, and maybe you ban that deck, and then the rest of the decks don't have a ton of access to HQ, and even if they did, it's not that popular of a type of card to run in the format, and 20 health is not that high when you're popping off with a Tsuruga. So I know you have played a lot of sort of Japan, Soviet, Soviet, Japan burn, particularly with At All Costs being run in this deck. I know that was one of your favorite cards before it was rotated. So what do you think of this version of the deck with Tsuruga added?
I'm first of all, I'm glad to see At All Costs making a comeback. It's so nice to see. Then the Tsuruga, I think, is a very potent card. Is a very I mean, Baron's also running a lot of he's running stall and delay, which is giving the Tsurugas time to or giving him time to set up the Tsuruga and then trigger it with honors and said card at all cost. I He's also running. I just see that he is also running a lot of, as you mentioned, burn like with the diplomatic attaché, which can be used on not just to clear units if he's ever in the situation where he wants to clear units on the front line. He can also use that later on in the game to attack his opponent's HQ, which can make a difference, but can also um, just be used on units if he, depending on what the board state is.
Yeah, and there's a special card I want to call out here, which is the one copy of Distant Front. And this is not a card that I have ever actually seen play before. But essentially, it's a one credit remove a card with, or remove a unit with 3 or less attack from the game, return it at the start of the next turn, and that can be used to push through a guard, like, say, Glamour Boys. But I think the reason that it's in this deck is for Saruga to set up a combo, because you can do Saruga, and then you play Distant Front, and then it's off the board, your opponent can't interact with it at all, it's not there, and then on the following turn it will reappear on the board, and you have all of your credits now to then play a Winter Warfare counter-offensive honor, and potentially just absolutely blow your opponent out. So it's a single copy of Distant Front, but it is a potentially a very, very powerful card, and I hope we get to see it pay off, because I think that's a very spicy inclusion in this list.
So he's using this sort of as like an isolation substitute, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And in this case, if he is using it on its own Saruga, it's actually just a better isolation, because isolation costs 2. So,
Mhm.
the very, very spicy deck building here coming out from Baron, really showcasing just his deck building skills. Like, there's a lot of stuff in here that I've never seen before. And there's so much of difference between just simply a good player playing a deck that people have seen before, but like the good player is making it, like refining it and making it a bit more competitive. But it's another thing entirely to come up with like your own deck entirely, or your own, completely coming up with the idea of using a specific card in a strategy or an archetype. Very, very creative stuff coming out here from Baron. But let's get to his third deck now, which is German France Discard. And this is a very fun deck because Discard is. We've seen a bit of Discard before in Pauper with cards like Case Yellow, but then following the Case Yellow nerf, not that popular because Wolfpack is special, MI5 is special, Annihilation is special, and these are sort of the big central cards of the discard format. But we see Baron running 3 copies of U375, 1 copy of Sabotage, and these are sort of the cards that are just going to not necessarily discard every single card in your opponent's deck. He doesn't need to do that. It's Pauper. There's very few comeback mechanics in this format. So if he can just discard down a few important cards at the right moment, he's playing more removal, more guard, more slow units, and with the Call to the Colonies, a bit of healing or draw. And that's probably more so than most decks, because again, it's access to draw, very, very difficult. So, running U375 with a little bit of card draw, and then again, these really annoying units like the Nebelwerfers, again, you see that Audi showing back up again. Sky Barons is very potentially powerful because a lot of people will play high cost air units just because they're very powerful. And then you see 4 copies of FW, another staple of the Pauper format, being just a standard 6-cost 5/5 fighter that also draws a card, incredibly powerful. But then France adding some very interesting cards here. The one of Sabotage, but then 2 Rimas, 3 Call to the Colonies, 3 Fiery Ambush, acting primarily as removal, I would imagine, but also with the ability to burn. And then 3 copies of the 51st Regiment. This is a very exciting deck to look at. I'm very excited to see this in action. What do you think of this deck?
I think this is probably by far the most interesting deck that Baron's, in my opinion, that Baron's bringing to this format this week, featuring a lot of the cool French cards like the 51st Regiment, which gives the deck some more versatility and adaptability. So if he's behind on, if he's facing units on the front line, he can use it as a guard. If he wants to push, he can use it aggressively. So I've always been a big fan of those cards that like allow for different playstyles to switch playstyles around quickly. Um, he's also running a lot of big chunky units that um might help him secure the win in this with this list. Also, I like the addition of the 2 Rimas that buff the neighboring units, give them mobilize and let them grow into something bigger. Yeah, we'll see.
All right, well, let's keep on going then. And here is his British deck. It is a British Japan. Um, I've seen versions of this deck in the past. This is a very, very fun deck coming out here from Baron. It's a deck he loves to play. Um, I don't know exactly what to call it. Is it Britain Japan Pin? Is it Britain Japan like OTK? Is it Britain Japan Control? Essentially, the idea of the deck is just use cards like Delaying Tactics, Naval Powers, the Type 94 TKs for surprise attacks, the naval operations, the supply shortages, the Suisses. Just stall down your opponent as much as possible. Just keep them doing anything other than hitting you in the HQ. And then eventually you just start hitting them in the HQ with these three Heians, these three Lancasters, and then the four copies of AA Barrage that can be used either to bounce your own very big plane back to your hand to then attack with it again on the following turn if you're out of big threats to do. Or you can do it on the Suisse to just bounce back the pin 3 units card. And that's very, very powerful. The stall potential for this deck is incredible, and if you commit to the board more than he can pin, he has 2 Monsoon Rots to just completely clear the board, and then 4 Convoy, 3 Lend-Lease, he will get through his deck. He will find those big planes, and if you don't kill him, he will kill you pretty quickly after that. Now, there's obviously some things that will stop this deck. It's just dead in its tracks if you run a lot of guards, if you run a lot of fighters. There's not enough Monsoon Rots to really get through that, so just a few well-placed guards and fighters can just completely shut this deck down. Like, just full stop. Like, you can't win. There is going to be matchups where this deck literally cannot win, but there's also going to be a lot of matchups where this deck is favored like 85-90%. And I think that's something Baron is really looking forward to, because with a ban, he can always ban a deck that might be good into this. And when people are building decks for this type of tournament, nobody is thinking about this deck as something to build around, something to keep in mind with what cards they're tacking into a Pauper format. Yeah, do you have anything else to add to this wacky deck from Baron?
Not really. One thing I want to mention is like I completely forgot that naval operation was ever a thing, and that seeing it now brings back some good as well as some bad memories.
Yeah, I
I'm
think
kind of traumatized.
I think everybody looking at this deck is just so glad that this is a Pauper format, so Baron can't
Yes.
run Forced Surrender. Because I'm sure if Baron could run Forced Surrender, he would be running Forced Surrender in this deck. And yeah, this deck is just absolutely terrifying. Um, and also, just taking a quick look at this deck, it looks like Baron might be getting a little prepared for the even odds format coming up next week. Because if you actually look at this deck, he's only running 4 even cost cards in the deck, which is interesting. But anyways, let's move on to Baron's final deck. It is a second Japanese deck. But unlike the Japan Soviet Tsuruga OTK Wombo combo, this one's very different. And this is a deck that I think we have all seen at least some versions of it before on ladder, because this is Japan USA Self Discard the Betty deck. And what's incredible about this deck is it is largely Pauper to begin with. Like, there's not many notable missing cards from this beyond just the Japanese elites like Audacity and Desperate Measures and Bombing Raid. But other than that, Barons fit in this very interesting self-discard package here with the 34ths, the experimental flights. The experimental flights will actually give him more elites that he would not otherwise be able to put in his deck. So now his opponents are going to have to be thinking about cards like Shiden off of the experimental flights. But then he has a ton of card draw possibility with the Sally and these supply chains. So, just playing a 34th on turn 1 might just pop off. But he can also drop down a turn 1 Betty. And turn 1 Betty, it gets answered by Bloody Sickle. But if your opponent's not playing Bloody Sickle in their deck, like if it's any other deck, a turn 1 Betty can just absolutely control the game from the start in a format like Pauper, where you're just going to have less access to chip damage, less access to these cheeky plays that can get rid of an early Betty. If it's just unit-to-unit trading and your opponent plays a bomber on turn 1, you're going to lose. And beyond that, there's of course a bit of a bomber sub-theme in terms of the actual units themselves, with 2 copies of the P-38 Lightning, 3 copies of Havoc. This means that if any bombers can stick on the board a little longer than just simply having a deployment effect, they will potentially get buffed up, their op costs reduced, and be able to press face through guard units with quite a bit of speed. So this is potentially maybe his best deck, or at least his most meta standard deck. What do you think about this? What are you a Betty believer, or do you think it's about as good in Pauper as it is on ladder, which is to say not?
I absolutely am a Betty believer. I also like the inclusion of the P-38 Lightning. As you mentioned, the bomber theme. That buffs, and Baron only needs like one or two bombers to stick around for a turn or two until he can deploy the Lightning, so that these bombers deal additional damage. And one thing I wanted to mention, I feel like need to point out is am I the only one who think it's kind of scary? Like the thought alone that he is running four experimental flights. So that's four potential Sheedans that can come out at any time.
Yeah, that's. I mean,
That's
there's a lot of whiffs. Like he could get like a Storm Dragon or a Pete. But like even in Pauper, like those aren't terrible options if the game goes a bit later. Um, and another
there's the there's the show Avatar, the Airbender, and Baron is the rule bender by trying to get his hands on the elites.
I mean that is a strategy that we will be seeing in at least one of Berto's decks as well. But something else I want to bring up with this list is the single copy of P38 or the two copies of P38 Lightning. That's the only restricted card in this list. So that's the only card that's been rotated out of the game. And going through all of the decks, there's much fewer rotated cards in the Pauper format than in the decks we saw last week, which was just completely classic. And I think that sort of goes to show the type of, like, the thought process into 1939's rotations. You can see they've rotated a lot of the very problematic, big, expensive elites, the gatekeepers of the game, so to say, to make sure that newer players aren't necessarily, like, hit with, like, oh, you need these 15 elites to play any meta deck. Whereas there's been less very, very powerful standards or limiteds rotated, which is why you're seeing less of them overall in this format. So I think that's just like a very interesting thought. And I hadn't really previously had that thought, but just looking through these deck lists, seeing that a lot of these Pauper cards are still in standard. Now, obviously, there's some exceptions. California and Monsoon Run supply shortages are all gone for very good reasons, but yeah, it is interesting to see. But now, that is all of Baron's decks. But of course, Baron is not simply going to be playing here by himself. He will be playing none other than Berto Burrito, who has 5 of his own decks. And speaking of cheating out elites, that is what Berto Burrito is going to be trying to do with this first deck of his, which is a Soviet USA ramp deck in Pauper, with 3 copies of those spy rings to get himself 3 copies of research and just try to outvalue his opponent. And yeah, there's if I'm Baron, I would consider banning this deck just because I see Spy Rings, I see Scorched Earths, I see Brionks. I do not want to play against this deck. But of course, on top of that, he also has the new, possibly new King of Standard Pauper, dare I say, in the 36th Cavalry. This card has been absolutely tearing up some of the lower ranks, I know, and some people have been making it work even in the higher ranks. And in a Pauper format, the 36th Cavalry definitely very terrified, especially with these 2 copies of Stand Together, to cheat it into a tank such as the KV-1 for even more elite cheating. So, what do you think about this list? What do you think it has enough stall tools to really get its use out of these much higher value cards?
Absolutely. I think this deck is no short of stall. And I'm looking at this list at the moment. I don't know what's scary. I don't know what's scaring me more. Is it the potential 6 nukes that can come through like Spyring? Or is it those huge 36 cavalries and the resulting tank that he gets when he's playing Stand Together on them? I really don't know. But I honestly I think it's the nukes.
Yeah. And
Uh,
there's also that one cheeky confusion, which can really just come in at a moment's notice and ruin some of the game plans of Baron's faster decks, particularly if it comes in on say like a Zippo or an SU that he cheated out. Confusion is such a cheeky card, and to run one of it, it means your opponent's always having to spend at least some amount of energy thinking about that card, how to play around it, how not to just get completely embarrassed, frankly, by a well-timed Confusion. But let's move on to his next deck, and this deck is basically just air. It's Brit US Air. We've seen no shortage of this on ladder, but of course this is Pauper, so there's going to be a number of non-standard inclusions, including such as the 3 copies of the RAF Buffalo, the 3 copies of the Dauntless, the 1 copy of the Hurricane Trop. So that's the one that becomes Veteran if it survives. And yeah, other than that, you just have the very standard air cards. 3 copy Swordfish, 3 copy Gladiator, 4 copy Cass, 4 copy Sea Embargo. And as we've seen from Baron's decks, there's not a ton of fighters. There's not a ton of removal. Baron's running no copies of Flampanzer that I can recall. So, just getting down a Swordfish on turn 1, Sea Embargo on turn 2, that's enough to just win the game. We talked about Betty on turn 1. Well, what happens if your opponent plays Swordfish on turn 1? Then these unexpected resistances will also be able to slow down the opponent, stop them from being able to just take out a bomber with a Blitz tank. And then, other than that, bombers go face, Sea Patrol at the end, Havoc at the end. These cards can go straight into the HQ if there's no fighter present. This is just a very, I think, a fairly, maybe not necessarily the first deck people think of when they think of Pauper, but just looking at how he's built the deck, I think this is a pretty well-rounded list. What do you think?
I do want to point out that, like, out of all the Pauper or lists that people have been playing in Pauper, I think Brit Air, looking at these some of these cards, Brit Air seems to be one of the most pauperable. I don't know if that's a word. Sorry. One of the most pauperable lists out there, and I do also want to point out that the Hurricane Trop is if you think about it, it's a really scary card. It's a 3/3, comes down as a 3/3, and how hard is it for if it's played on curve? How hard is it for this card to survive combat, and then it transforms itself into a 5/5, which yeah can be kind of hard to deal with for some of the decks that we've seen.
It's also important to think that it's not just you have to attack and it survives. It's just if it survives at a combat. And has Baron ever seen a Trop before? Is Baron going to fall for just thinking, oh, I have a 1 attack unit and a 2 attack unit, I'll trade into the Trop? You hit it with the first unit, and then the Trop turns into a 5/5. That's a very realistic possibility of happening. But another thing I mentioned about this deck is there's not a single reserved card in this list. Yeah, if you think about the greatest air cards that have been reserved, it's Empire Strikes, and that's a special. And really, like, a couple of the cards have been nerfed, but again, like the RAF Lightning, that's a special. The Spitfire, that's an elite. There's just, like, this is a well-rounded list. I'm struggling to think, other than maybe like a P-38 Lightning, rather than some of the Dauntlesses, perhaps, to fit in some reserve cards, but I think this is a solid list. The Dauntlesses is probably, to me, the most questionable inclusion here, but again, heavy armor, and it's a bomber, so if your opponent is relying on unit-to-unit trading, stuff like a Greyhound's 35Ts, just slapping heavy armor 1 onto a unit makes it so much harder for your opponent to remove. Yeah, this is a very interesting deck. But let's continue on to his third deck here, and this is very funny because I was actually playing a somewhat similar list on ladder just yesterday, but it's a Brit Poland guard spam deck where you're running Poland for stubborn defenses, for the stretch the lines, for the 35th Infantries, but you're not actually running any like big intel synergy cards. There's no Tarnows. Well, obviously there's no Tarnows in this because it's Pauper. But just using Poland for guard is an interesting strategy because Stretch the Line comes down as just a 2-cost 3/3 guard with upside, and that's very good. And then it allows you to run Stiff Upper Lip, because if we saw in the previous deck 4 convoys in the air deck, this deck can't run convoy, but it can run Stiff Upper Lip. It can run the supply shortages, the monsoon rots that you would love to see from Britain, and then you just run all the guards: 3 Royal West Kents, 4 Churchills, 2 Glamour Boys. This is basically just my type of Pauper deck, where you'd run Britain, you run a lot of grindy units, high health units, and just grind your opponent out. And the 2 copies of Entrenched means that at any point, Berto can just end the game very fast. Like, for example, if he's up against Baron's sort of pinned deck with all of the Blitz bombers, that deck could be very scary. But if at any point Baron lets a guard stick in the front line without being pinned, this Entrenched could come out and just end the game immediately. Plus, there's the Coastal gun for additional healing. And what I really love about this deck is the 4 copies of Churchill, 2 copies of Glamour Boys. This shows such a degree of forethought into building this lineup, because on ladder, everybody runs Glamour Boys. It's 4 of Glamour Boys, and if you want additional guides, maybe you would run 2 copies of Churchill. Berto's doing that the other way around because he knows in Pauper, HQ defense, substantially less important. And in Pauper, you can't run a lot of the very efficient cheap removal that would otherwise punish Churchill for doing a 5-cost play a big unit. Cards like Commit the Reserves, like Honorable Death, like Radiant Brigade, like White Death to just suppress the guard and the heavy armor and go face. All of these cards can't be run in this format. It's a lot more unit-to-unit trading, and a 2/7 heavy armor is actually better than a 3/6 not heavy armor, even if the 3/6 has a deployment effect. So I absolutely love this decision by Berto. What do you think about this list? This is very different than a very different direction than the previous list we saw from Berto Burrito.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think we can both agree on stiff upper lip in this list being just a better convoy because it is not really a condition to have a guard out and for this list. Then I'm looking at Entrenched and Churchill, which is absolutely scary. You think about it. And also the first responders, which has recently been changed. The 1939 moved the cost from 4 down to 3, which is an absolute nightmare. I mean, we can both speak from experience here that it's an absolute nightmare to go up against somebody running first responders if you're playing a board-based deck. That is absolutely horrifying. And we'll see if and how Berto is going to put that card to use against Baron's decks.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we have 2 more decks to get through, so let's look at his Japan Italy aggro. And what I absolutely love about this deck is that this deck has 31 1-cost cards. 31 1-drops. Like, that's absolutely insane. There's just going to be no shortage of just gas in this deck. And I love the decision to do Italy Ally because it gives you some very powerful cards. Because again, Pauper is a very slow format. A lot of decks are going to be doing absolutely nothing on turn 1 and probably nothing on turn 2. With this deck, turn 1 you play like a Type 94, turn 2 you hit them in the face for 1 damage, and then you play Autocannon, you play Kanone, and your Kanone is just a 1-cost 1/3 Audi. And again, we saw it, how powerful Audis are, how much these players both value running Audis in their lists. 4 copies of a 1/3 1-cost Audi with the ability to buff it with Type 93. Incredibly powerful. Mare Nostrum, again, 1-cost removal. Removal's difficult to come by. 1-cost, 3 damage removal. Very, very efficient, and you're virtually guaranteed to constantly have the HQ lead in this matchup. The 4 copies of Shibata, also very high damage potential. Expansion, solid, classic Japan aggro card draw. And then at the top end of the list, 3 copies of the Fiat G55, a 6/6 fighter coming down on 4 if you have, I believe it's a 5 HQ difference over your opponent. Very easy for him to have by turn 4, turn 5. And we talked about it, not a lot of decks run fighters, so this is going to block all of those bombers. But also, not a lot of decks have removal for fighters. So if this Fiat G55 can hit face, that is a huge amount of damage coming through. This is a very, very aggressive deck. What do you think about this? I know you love Japan aggro.
Yes.
Is this your favorite list out of Berto's so far?
Probably yeah. So far, I do have to say. What I think is super scary is the Canone. If it comes down on like if that's the first card, if I'm playing against Berto and he's playing this list, and I see he's going first and he drops the Canone, I pretty much know I'm in deep trouble. Especially because he's gonna hit my face over and over again. And he's doing everything he can to like just set up the turn 4 Fiat. And at this point, like, what do you do if you don't have an answer, whether that's in form of an order or if you can trade? Yeah, this is going to be a huge problem. Like a 6/6 playing on turn 4, turn 5 is kind of, yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
not to say GG, but
Not to say GG, but GG.
yeah.
So now let's take a look at Berto's last deck here. It is probably the most played Pauper deck, just like in terms of general archetypes. It is US German frontline, and we saw the Italy ally in the Japan deck. That is likely because this German ally with the cards like 35T, the Jaeger regiments, was being saved for its combination with US. Incredibly potent combination. Look at those very powerful 1-drops. Those are all very premium 1-drops you want in this game. And that is just going to curve straight into the 4 Shermans, 3 5th Rangers, 3 Californias, 2 Weakened Duets. This is what Pauper Frontline is all about. It's just get a board of sticky units, high health units, slam a Weakened Duet on it, and you just control the value trades for the entire rest of the game. One of Blitzkrieg for potential burst, the one copy of Swag because again artillery is absolutely insane, and suppress is also a very powerful mechanic. You see that with the 3 copies of the M10, and then 3 copies of the newly changed Breakthrough. And I absolutely love this call by Berto Burrito because if you look at his deck, it's a lot of higher op units than you might normally see in Frontline. And also, it's just 3 cost, deal 3 damage. And any amount of additional tempo on top of that is an incredible payoff. Yeah, this is just sort of the bread and butter of Pauper. Do you think Baron bans this, or do you think that this deck has seen its time in the Pauper Sun? Because honestly, going into this format, I was thinking, well, of course, U.S. Germany. It's always been the best. It's going to be the best here. I've seen a lot of different strategies by both players that made me think, is this just better than U.S. Germany? Like, how does U.S. Germany possibly beat this? And it's not necessarily by hard targeted U.S. Germany. It's just maybe U.S. Germany has seen its time in the sun, or do you think that it's still just as good as we all remember it? I mean, once the Californias start rolling, what decks are going to be able to stand up against that?
So, like 2 lists ago, we looked at Berto's Brit Air list, and I mentioned that it's a really pauperable list. I don't know if that word exists.
It's a
I'm
word
sorry
now.
again. Okay, we make it happen. I think US frontline is also like comes in close second as being a also super pauperable list. I like some of the additions, some of the choices that Berto went with, like the triple breakthrough, the swag also like adds suppression as adds a way to suppress problematic units like the Suruga, for instance. Just removing its effect entirely can be scary, and like he has the way to grow his board with the 2 weakened dudes, which is also kind of scary if you think about it. Like you build a board, then you slap a weakened dude, and all your like tiny little or initially small little units like just grow into something like more resilient with the buff provided by weakened dude. Yeah, I'm not sold on like this being a must ban. Um, but I can see how this deck is posing a problem to some of the decks that Baron is bringing. So I'd wager. I that's really something I can't answer. I don't know, but it's
All right, well, we don't have to worry about which decks are the strongest because we are here casting. Our players, however, do have to consider what decks they think are the strongest, or
true.
at the very least strongest against their particular lineup, because we get here to the bans, and we do have the bans ready for us here. It is going to be Baron von Glower's Japan Soviet Saruga deck is being banned by Berto Burrito, and Berto's Britain Poland guard spam deck is being banned out by Baron. So I know both of these players have Baron has 2 Japan decks, Berto has 2 British decks. So it's kind of difficult to identify which ones, but Berto Burrito is still going to have access to his Brit Air, and Baron von Glower is still going to have access to his I'm already forgetting what his other Japan deck was. It's not Japan Italy. Is it just a Japan Germany aggro? either way, we will see. There's a lot of decks here from our players. It is of course the Betty deck, the Japan US Betty. So we will get to see Betty hopefully. Um, but yeah, so far that is it for us in sort of the pre-show. Let's get ready to um, get into the games. I'll tell the players um, that they are ready to start. And yeah, just a reminder, while we're waiting to get into the games, exclamation mark giveaway to enter the giveaway. It is going to be gold for the winners, so you can use it however you want. So, this is the perfect thing to win in a cards giveaway, so make sure you enter. Um, yeah, what do you think the thought process is to bringing, like, what deck do you start with? Particularly in Pauper, where it's decks that they probably don't have like a ton of reps on. Certainly going against decks that they don't have a ton of reps on. Um, what do you think the thought process is that goes into this?
I think, like personally, what I would do, and I think that Baron more so than Berto is kind of like siding with me here when I say like I want to get the games on the decks that I'm less confident with out of the way. So I keep my stronger decks for later in the the pairing. Um, so I think there's a not so small chance that we see Baron von Glower leading with Germany, France. Um, and for Berto, that would probably be. I I'm not sure like what Berto's approach is going to be. Maybe Berto is trying to do the same thing, where he says, "Okay, I'm going to pick the deck that I'm least confident with, first to get that out of the way and save the more powerful decks or the decks that I'm more confident with for later in the match."
Well, we have our answer here because
Ooh,
we are
okay.
into game one. And Berto does not seem to be picking the deck he's least confident on, I would imagine, because he is starting with Brit Air. And this is um, probably his strongest list here. Or at least the list that he's most confident on, it has the most reps on. Um, if we pull back here, we can see what options, what countermeasures Baron is choosing between. And it looks like in the end he picks the Stranglehold, which is very, very cheeky here.
This brings joy. This brings so much joy. I love this card so much.
And here we are. Baron picks up his single copy of Sky Barons. It's very strong. He also has Tactical Strike for the Bomber. But he might also just want to play down the Reichsbank and then do all of that on the following turn. Instead, it looks like he's opting to just play the 51st Regiment as a 2/6. Um, this is perfectly reasonable, considering that there's only one bomber on the board. Maybe he's waiting for the bomber to get some buffs, but the Greyhound here is going to be very big.
Mm. That enables him to trade into the Elf Clone with the Swordfish.
And from Baron's side, Berto's hand isn't looking great. There's no current buff. There's no close air supports. There's no sea embargoes. Um, but on the other hand, he has a couple bombers. He has a Havoc. He has a Swordfish. And Baron doesn't have a lot. He has enough guard if he wants to. If he's able to efficiently use his removal to take out the bombers, the Sky Barons and the Tactical Strike to answer both of Berto's bombers, and then the guards can
Mm.
just sit back and eat hit after hit from these fighters. Um, Going for the Reichsbank, this is going to open up his opportunities for the next turn, but there's the close air support. Berto had 4 very powerful buff cards in his deck to draw, so it's not unreasonable that he finds one, but this is going to turn things around quite a bit. I imagine we see one coming out here.
And there we go with the first close air support. Um,
Looks like he's actually leaning towards saving it. Maybe he wants to get both buffs on the both bombers because he recognizes bombers more important in this matchup than the fighters. And also, the Havoc coming down here does let him just take out the unit, keep his Greyhound alive. That also could have been another consideration of his. Baron's going to hold the Stranglehold. We'll see if Berto plays around it.
10 credits. That's a whopping amount.
Panzer 4, but what are you Panzer 4? Are you just going to Panzer 4 the Swordfish, Sky Barons, or Tactical Strike the Havoc? Removes the bombers from the board, but it's not necessarily developing a ton of your own board. I mean, a tank is nice, but this
And
Greyhound right
he's
now is offering so much value.
probably going for the Swordfish as it doesn't have Blitz when it comes back. Um, okay, so he's clearing the bombers, which and he's still
Ooh,
holding up that stranglehold.
that
Oh.
Stranglehold. I mean, it's hard to say that Berto just walked into it, because what else was Berto going to be doing with his credits? If he was confident it was the Stranglehold, he could have attacked with the other three units first. But he easily could have been a close air support, not a close air support, sorry, a careless talk. And if it was the careless talk, he would have done other things with his credits other than attack face with these fighters. So
Hmm?
I think Berto just took the risk here, hoping it was the careless talk, expected it to be the careless talk. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Baron picks up the FW, and that's going to be huge at blocking um, some of these bombers here. Unexpected resistance drawn a little too late. Um, but Berto does have the very cheap Sea Patrol in hand. He can take out this tank with no issues and develop his board, and if he wants, pressure face with 4 damage and just start getting the pain train rolling. How do you think Berto
Okay.
decides what to buff here? Do you think he buffs the bomber, or do you think he buffs the fighters and recognizes my opponent is going to remove this bomber no matter what?
I I think if he okay, so he's deciding to buff the bomber alongside with it. Um I think Berto is aware that like uh, Baron's list is running guards and he has to circumvent, he has to bypass the guards somehow. And so naturally Baron is going to focus on the bombers more so than the fighters. Um
On the flip
you,
side, buffing this bomber does make the Rima play a lot more awkward here. I mean, from from Berto's perspective, if the Rima comes down here, it's very annoying. Um, for
it also
Berto,
just
but from Baron's perspective, he's thinking like, well, if I play Reba and he has another close air support, suddenly this game is looking terrible. But instead he's going to go for the Sky Barons, and I believe that was Reichsbank off the Sky Barons. Um,
mm,
and that means next turn he's going to be able to do FW and Rima in the same turn, and that's going to be huge.
yeah, that's scary.
I would have liked to see him take out one of these gladiators maybe instead of the swordfish if he knew his follow-up turn was FW. Um, just because the FW is going to block the bomber
It's blocked
regardless.
up, yeah. It's gonna block the swordfish. Do you think, Jaking, do you think we'll ever see this unexpected resistance being triggered by Baron this match?
Maybe not, and it might also just be discarded here. Instead, it's going to hit the buffalo. Sea embargo top deck,
Oh, okay.
but that's. I mean, it keeps the dauntless alive if the dauntless hits into the FW, but there's no way to finish that up because the FW is guarded. So instead, it's going to come out on the gladiator, and that is not the options you want to see. You're looking for
No.
the kitty hawk. You're looking for the shark. You are not looking for 3 units that do nothing to
Maybe
turn
even
play
just
them.
an albacore that deals 1 damage to the Rima. Uh,
Yeah, you don't want to take the Oxford. That's only going to help your opponent. I like this Wildebeest pickup. Um, Here, I want to just see him triple trade into the Rima and maybe throw out the Wildebeest to deal 2 damage to the HQ as well. Um, he's going to hit the FW. That sacrifices the Dauntless. It makes room on his board, but also it removes the mobilization off the FW. And he's going to go for the value hit, the 3/6 into the Rima, hold up unexpected resistance, and pass the turn back. So if this is ladder, you're thinking, oh, my opponent has Ultra, but of course,
mm,
Pauper, no Ultras.
mm.
And
Uh-uh.
the things are looking very quickly to be headed in Baron's direction because Berto runs convoys, but there's no Lend Leases in this deck. that was saved for the Brit Pole. And
This looks like a turning point. Baron took a lot of damage so far, but um, this seems like a turning point in the match where Baron just like goes into the offense. Now he can technically.
do you think Baron feels safe enough to just play Gathering Storm this turn?
That's what I'm. Yeah, I would consider it. Like, it's entirely possible.
We see from Berto's hand that he's entirely safe to do so, but from Baron's hand, you're thinking, what if my opponent has close air support, Sea Patrol? Now, if he had a close air support, he probably would have played it the previous turn, but what if he top decks close air support? Um, he probably would have played Sea Patrol, but, like, you don't really want to take a risk. It feels like you can't lose this game by playing safe. So that's exactly what he's going to do. He plays safe, and it's going to work out for him because what does Berto do here?
Hmm.
You can remove Mobilize from the 51st, you can kill Rima, but you're not answering the FW, and now that's going to start to grow.
Yeah, Rima gives mobilize every turn. So you see, like that's a problem Berto needs to find an answer to. For
And we see Berto contemplating his decisions. The 3-2 is likely going to go into the Rima, and then he's likely going to hit the 51st. Chooses to not attack with the Greyhound. I like this. Keep the Greyhound alive. Stop the 51st from just being able to trade into it. Play out the Bombers. One of these will die to the FW. Nebelwerfer might come out to take out the Greyhound with the 51st. Jaeger will give him a draw as well. Likely start with that being played on the Swordfish, I would imagine, which is then hit by the
hmm?
FW, and then the Jaeger can be used instead of the Nebelwerfer to draw, or to take out the Greyhound. And he doesn't know what this last card is in Berto's hand, but if you're looking at the deck list, you've got to start to think, is this just an unexpected resistance? Because there's only been one opportunity for an unexpected resistance to be triggered. So if one was drawn at any point after that, that would be just a dead card sitting in his hand.
Hmm?
And with the Swordfish
And
and
that's
um, the Wildebeest coming out the previous turn, it's probably not a bomber because your opponent's prepared to just dump everything on the board.
that's second Rima and in Baron's hand. It's looking scary.
And do you think we'll just
What
see the resignation from Berto Burrito?
it's entirely possible. Let's see what he's
He can take out both FWs here.
if he trades the gladiator.
Chooses to get the damage in with the Greyhounds and trade out. Leaves the FW alive. I don't like this play as much. You keep your Greyhounds around, and you get rid of the guard, but you don't have any Blitz fighters. You do have the Blitz bombers, so getting rid of this fighter would have been a much better choice here. We'll see if Baron actually goes for the
Oh,
U375 or not. If he doesn't, that's like
I
a
was
ultimate call out of saying, I know exactly what card is in your hand, and it is not
I
with
was
this
just
guy.
going to say that, like, does he want to find out what card this last remaining card in Berto's hand is, or does he know already?
He also might be thinking about which side of the Rima he wants to play the Nebelwerfer, whether to give it Mobilize or not, and he chooses to go for the Mobilization. Berto top deck C Embargo. He can play it on Baron's FW to gain a develop, but there's nothing you can develop into that's going to make that feel good, so he's just going to pass back the turn. And Careless Talk will likely kill anything that C Embargo could be played on. Doesn't even matter because C Embargo is discarded, and Baron wins the game next turn on board, and I don't think there's any draw in Berto's deck that will win him the game. He can draw Convoy into Sea Patrol, take out the Nebelwerfer, potentially stay alive a turn, but um, there's nothing here
Not
that
we can do on that.
we even see the Rima pushed up, triggers the unexpected resistance, a bit of an incorrect ordering. If Baron had done that first, it would have guaranteed it. Berto top decks the Convoy, but it draws him into nothing, and that is going to be Baron taking game one over Berto Burrito. Yeah, I mean, just looking at the lineups, I don't know. I think that's got to be a pretty close matchup. Baron did find those Reichsbanks, and that's obviously very very huge, particularly that early in the game, and like it helped him get out the FWs. But he runs 4 FWs, he runs a bunch of healing. Um, is is that just like a good matchup for him? Or was there anything Berto could have done differently, maybe? Or was
Mm,
that just a game over by the draws?
I don't think it's the nature of the deck that Baron just played. Having a lot of guards and removal for the bombers, it's making it really hard for Berto to like really do anything about it. Like as soon as like the credit wheel starts turning and Baron is getting these massive credits early on in the game, and then he's able to just like deploy answers and deal with the threats deployed by Berto. It's really hard to to come back or do anything in this situation.
And do you think Berto's just going to bring the air deck again? Like, does he just think it's his best deck? It's his best shot at getting the win? Your opponent brought maybe his best deck in game one, you lost. What could be just a coin toss matchup, and you just bring it again? Or do you think Berto just switches to something else, sort of catch Baron off guard? Because Baron might be able to think, well, if he's going to bring air again, maybe I bring
Mhm.
my best deck into air. I don't necessarily know which one that is, but there's a lot of thought that goes into just what deck to bring, particularly
I
when you have
don't
so many options.
Personally, I don't think that Berto's ever gonna try and brute force a win on Brit Air here. He's considering switching to US Frontline for a game. That's
I mean,
Although like Brit Air seems to be good against the I'm sorry, I have to ask again, I have to make sure. Which Japanese deck did Berto ban?
the Saruga OTK, so it is the
Let's see.
Betty deck that's
We
left over, and that's probably going
Okay.
to be a good matchup for air. You have gladiators take out the Bettys,
Hmm.
but
True.
I mean, I know a lot about brute forcing air. The very first tournament match I ever played against Berto Burrito, it was in the finals, and I played air 3 times in a row, and I lost with air 3 times in a row. So yeah, Berto is also knows about brute forcing air, but he was on the other side of that. But this is a completely different format, completely different cards. Um, and before we get into the next game, let's draw our first giveaway. So exclamation mark giveaway in the Twitch chat if you haven't already. And let's draw our first entrant. It is Hansen Holes has won the first giveaway. So I will just for everybody, I will send out all of the giveaway codes through Twitch Whispers after the stream. So make sure your Twitch Whispers are on to receive whispers from strangers, or else I can't send it to you. And just double check it, even if you think it's on. Double check it. Always better safe than sorry. And also after the stream, so don't worry if I don't send it to you within an hour. You will still get your code. It will be remembered. I have it written down. No worries about that. Um, Now let's get the players into into game two. And honestly, I wouldn't mind seeing the Soviet deck coming out from Berto, but I also wouldn't mind the air deck. Like you have some pretty good matchups. Here they go into game two. Berto is going to be sticking to air. And we see pretty solid hand. It's going to be going up against the US Soviet frontline, and
Hmm.
US Soviet is going first. Very, very scary. If we see a war production picked up here, things
Ooh.
could get out of hand very fast. We Baron misses the war production, but he's going to have 2 1-drops in the front line to start hitting away at the swordfish. And there's the mulligan, a
Hmm.
ton of 1-drops coming out here from Berto. But it's going to have to answer the swarm of slightly faster 1-drops from Baron, although Berto's 1-drops do have slightly more health. Plays the Gladiator, and this does mean that, oh, the War Production top deck means Priest is
Oh my.
coming out. He can also trade to guarantee remove the Gladiator and get another 164th to the front line. And Baron's just going to have an empty hand on
He's
turn 2 and
considering it.
just say go. Um, it's not quite over. Berto does have Sea Patrols in his deck he could draw into. And even just looking at his hand, um, he is going to be able to get down 2 units. But the power of the 164th here as well means that if Berto just tries to
Oh.
play 2 1-drops, like play a Greyhound and a Swordfish, um, it will just simply be removed by the Priest and the 2 units that can attack. So his best play is probably just Greyhound into the 2-1.
Mhm.
Will get removed. Scout card top deck threatens to buff the Priest even further. He will also trade in the 164th, just make it a 4/4, get it out of range. He knows Berto's deck has no suppress.
But then again, the priest, while being a strong card, it can only address one of Berto's planes per turn. So if Berto manages to get out a couple of units, deploy a couple of threats uh in a in a single turn, then it might be hard for Baron, especially with no cards in his hand or one card as he's starting next turn with,
The choice
to address all of these threats.
the choice to buff the Priest last turn, rather than taking the value trade, keeping 164th on the board, the choice to trade it in immediately, get a 4/4 arty, means that Dauntless will be answered. If he hadn't done that, if this Priest was a 3/3 and 164th was on the board, Dauntless comes down and actually can't be removed. So very heads up play by Baron stops what could have been a
No,
potentially huge top deck.
not only does it address the Dauntless, it also like plays around Sea Patrol.
Yeah, and Swordfish close air support does mean that Havoc and the remaining Swordfish will be able to answer the Priest on the following turn. There's nothing Baron can do about that, but the 30-second draw from Baron, not only does it give him a bunch of units to just spam out on the board, it also means that he now has, if he plays this 30-second, 4 fewer cards in the deck. Well, 3 fewer than he would have otherwise had, and this means he's 3 cards closer to finding his Shermans, or other buff cards. But of course, he also could easily top deck something like a War Production, which would not really do a whole lot of anything right now. Instead, it's going to be the M10 draw, and that's good. I would like to see him save it. I would like to see him just push up
Mhm.
4 units, put Berto in the same situation he was in just the turn before, of, you know what, you might have better units on the board, but you can't remove all of my units.
Mhm.
And also might catch the sea embargo here. Although I suspect Berto will instead just play the RAF Buffalo, favor getting units on the board, but he top decks
Let me
another
see another
Havoc,
Havoc. Oh,
and that's going to be absolutely huge. And this
I can
very
you can
easily
start
could move
addressing
the
some of
turning
those
point.
threats in the front line.
Yeah, and something Berto let me know while we were going over our initial stream. Apparently, there was a mistake in the picture of the decks we showed earlier that showed him only having 2 Havocs. He does run 4 Havocs in the deck. So this isn't, and that
Hmm.
is correct in the deck list. If you type !deck lists, you will see the correct version of the list. But it does mean that this wasn't that unlikely of an outcome, but he chooses to not actually play it. And we'll see what Baron here chooses to do. Most likely, this Havoc will certainly be dying. He chooses instead to take out the Swordfish. That's interesting. I think he's valuing Havoc having 2 operation costs, so he will hate to see the second Havoc come down alongside the RAF Buffalo to,
Hmm.
pardon my pun, wreak havoc on Baron's board here.
Isn't that my job to do these terrible puns?
And Sherman top deck for Baron. This is going to keep him in the game. Fifth
Oh my
Rangers,
God.
obviously very good. One of these Havocs can already be answered, but the Sherman top deck into the half track. He can't play it this turn. But, he will have just a 4/4 on board. And he's looking at bouncing the Buffalo, getting half track on board, leaving his opponent with the Bombers for a turn. I'm not sure how much I like this because your opponent runs a lot of buff cards. Um,
Mm.
so it's a tempo swing, but it's a tempo swing you're basically guaranteed to always get. And now the sea embargo is going to come out here and make it much more difficult to answer the units here from Baron. But maybe what he's hoping for is just slowing Berto down. He's saying, you know what, if my opponent has a third Havoc, I lose the game, that's fine. I'm going to play around my opponent having to attack with these 2/2-op bombers every turn rather than playing more units on the board. But a Swordfish pickup means that he's going to be able to play a third bomber while removing 2 tanks here. And at this point, I mean, you just hit the 3/3 Havoc and push a 4/4 Fifth Rangers to the board, and now it's anyone's game to win. Is okay. For a second, I thought Baron was going to go for the 5/5. Oh, he's thinking about unexpected resistance because again, 2 copies. He chooses to potentially lose the Fifth Rangers, favoring rather the ability to guarantee kill a unit with Sherman. But unfortunately for Berto, he does not have unexpected resistance. If he did, think of that tempo swing. That would be 0 credits, destroy a 5th Rangers. Sea Patrol does mean he will be able to answer one of these units. And maybe he gets the Dauntless down as well. Or does he favor attacking with Havoc? He's going to favor attacking with Havoc.
Getting the 2 damage in on the Sherman.
Now, Berto chose to ran a single copy of Stars and Stripes in his US frontline list. Baron, on the other hand, has not because he's on this 5th Rangers version of the deck. Or not the 5th Ranger, sorry, he's on a War Production version of the deck, so he doesn't want to run any other orders. Can you imagine a Stars and Stripes in this situation? That would just be immediate game over. Instead, he's just going to play down Zippo, push another 5th Rangers, try to keep the units on the board. Berto tried the unexpected resistance.
And there is the unexpected resistance that we were just talking about.
Yeah, he would have loved to see that 2 turns ago, or even last turn.
Yeah.
Here, it will likely just trigger a 1/64th, which might even be a bad thing for him if Baron chooses to play around it. Get out the 1/64th first. The +1/+1 from the 1/64th immediately triggering. If it hits the Zippo, could be the difference between another bomber sticking on the board or not. But Berto also has to be thinking about his HQ total, because Zippo does extra damage to HQ, which means Baron is only 6 damage off lethal here. Now,
Baron... Looking at Baron's list, that shouldn't be too hard to achieve.
Yeah.
All he needs is another Sherman draw, and then...
Baron doesn't run a lot of Blitz cards, but he doesn't necessarily need a lot of Blitz cards, because Berto's hand right now, it's really awkward. It's difficult for him to remove a bunch of these units. He's going to get down both Dauntlesses. This is going to threaten to remove everything Baron has, and Berto doesn't hold unexpected resistance up, which is going to stop the ability of the 1/64th from buffing Zippo, which means Zippo will likely go face. 5th Rangers will probably take out one of these Dauntlesses.
And then fall to the other.
And I just realized I forgot to update the score here. So, it is, of course, 1-0 for Baron already. And I think Baron here is thinking about, do I trade, do I not? I think he has to trade, because if he doesn't, his board gets removed, and a Swordfish gets jammed to the front line.
He's keeping the amount of buff cards in Berto's list in mind. Like, one C embargo can help him dealing with the Zippo on the back line. Now we see the War Production. With War Production, such a great card, but without the hand to follow up, it's a bit...
Oh, Havoc top deck. Number 3.
That's the third.
That's absolutely back-rank. Now, to be fair,
it's gotta be...
To be completely fair to Berto, he easily also could have drawn a close air support. He could have drawn a sea embargo into a Kitty Hawk. There's no shortage of good draws he has there. But it doesn't clear, and a top deck Sherman is going to bring Baron once again back into it. Sherman into Sherman 1/64th is going to stick around to trade. He can even War Production out of the 4th Sherman from his deck.
This is insane. He instead decides to go for the priest, clearing that one Swordfish.
And I actually like this play from him. I think that's the responsible play, is to not get carried away with the Sherman draws, say, my opponent, the Sherman is going to stick around. I'm instead going to get out this priest. Um, although,
Isn't
I don't know,
isn't looking
actually.
too bad for Berto. He can address the priest. He can kill one of the Shermans with the Sea Patrol.
Yep, this will lose Dauntless, and the Sherman number 4 coming in is likely going to um, give Birdo some heart palpitations here. He's
Yeah.
thinking, I've seen 3 Shermans. What could happen?
Yeah, what's the worst thing that could happen here?
I would have liked to see the war production coming out just in case you get the cards to spend. Although, yeah, because there's a world where
You
you
mean like,
draw third, fifth Rangers and second or third war production.
so you
Um,
mean like leading with the infantry, then playing wall production to see to then
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have to play the infantry, but just starting with the war production, because the only punish is if you draw another war production, and there's some possibility
yeah.
of thinking like, well, maybe I don't draw my other war production, and I want the 2 extra credits on a different turn, um, but that's not really the case. Again, he could have used war production here to deal 1 damage to one of these bombers here, so we will keep that in mind when we think about um, how if things go awry, but at the moment things do not look like they will be going awry.
Mm,
Bruno runs the same amount of card draw in his deck as Baron does, but he has found. Has he found any convoy this game, or was that the previous game? I'm trying to remember at this point. I don't actually
that
know.
we haven't seen any convoys this game.
Yeah, that's quite unfortunate. He's going to
Uh,
lose his 2 remaining bombers here. And, he can get bailed out by convoy. He can absolutely be bailed out by convoy. But is that
mm,
going to happen? He also had the opportunity to play around close air support by removing the Buffalo rather than the Havoc. That would, of course, just lose your Sherman for free. Unexpected resistance. That will slow down the
no,
5-3, but that's not what you want
that
to
is.
see. And I have to imagine Berto here is molding. And completely fair enough to him on that, because this is just brutal, brutal games. But that's why Baron runs these types of decks. They get off a very strong start, and then 4 Shermans, any deck with 4 Shermans always has the possibility of coming back into the game.
But the transition that we saw, like these consecutive like 3 Sherman draws, that is,
And I think this was the
yeah, I think
last turn that Berto had to realistically come back in this game with a series
he's
of convoy
forced to
draws.
trade the Sherman.
Because he's dropping to 3 health this turn, 2 with the scout car.
Ooh,
Oh, of course, the SU is pinned, so he's technically not
there
dead
is
yet, but he needs
still
to
a
answer
chance.
SU and Zippo. The 4th Havoc draw is not going to do that, and
No.
Baron takes game 2 for a 2-0 lead. That's an absolutely massive victory coming in here for Baron.
The 3 Sherman draws, that's kind of insane. That was my personal highlight so far.
Yeah, that's nasty. And if I recall correctly, I think Innocent Bubbles also took a 2-0 lead over Berto Burrito. I could be wrong about that. It has been a week, but I think Berto also got off to a slow start against Innocent Bubbles, and he was able to bring it back to a game 7. So we'll see if he can do that again here. But now, looking at the 2 decks from Baron, you have his Betty deck, and you have his Brid Japan pin control list thing. If I'm Berto, I'm thinking I can beat that pin list 4 times in a row. Now, I don't know if that's true, but that's something that you have to believe as a player staring down the 2-0 scoreboard. This Betty will probably get a win. I think you bring air again. Hope you get mashed into Betty, get your free win on air, get a
Mm.
point on the scoreboard. But after that, I mean, just staring down this deficit. What does Berto have to do to come back in this
I,
series?
I I just think that like the most reasonable pick here is like we had it earlier. I said it somewhat like semi jokingly, but now it's becoming serious. Like you have to bring Brood Air again, right? Because like the pin deck that Baron's bringing to the tournament, most of these pins affect ground units only, right? And what ground units does an air deck run? And the other deck that Baron's bringing, the Betty deck, is full of bombers, and we have the fighters to deal with those bombers to address them. So I think going Brit Air again might be the way to secure his first win.
Yeah, and the Brit Air deck should also be good against the Pin deck, just because you will stop the big bombers, the big Lancaster bombers from being able to go face, with like your gladiators, with your buffaloes. I guess the worry is maybe if the pin is consistent enough, you'll be able to just lock you out, and then you'll eventually die to 4 hits from a Heian, because you don't run any healing. But do you take that risk? I don't know. But let's draw another giveaway here. So exclamation mark a giveaway in Twitch chat to join. Again, thank you, big thanks to everybody for tuning in live. I know it's Friday afternoon, or Friday evening for the Europeans. There's a lot of things you could be doing. You are here watching us watch Berto versus Baron. That's awesome. Huge. It's wonderful to see the support coming out from the community, and that's lets people who want to run community tournaments know how much support there is out there, but it also lets 1939 know how much support that could be out there for them, either them to continue making supporting community run events or make their own community geared events. So let's draw an entrant, and it is Mr. Balls 23. Congratulations on winning the giveaway. Again, I will be messaging you after the stream, so make sure your Twitch whispers are open, and I will let the players know that they can get into Game 3. All right. Yeah, we will see just if Berto is able to bounce back from what is honestly not just a deficit. It's one thing to lose 2 games, but it's another thing to lose 2 games in that manner. Because man, if I'm Berto, it's hard to get that last game out of your head. Just thinking like I should have won that game 99% of the time, but my opponent
Yeah,
had the 1% draws.
yeah, that's I'm all the same. I'm all the same.
We are going to see Japan versus Japan. Now, these are 2 very different Japan decks. This is, of course, Japan Italy from Berto versus the Japan USA Betty from Baron. And Baron has, Experimental Flight into Sally can draw a bunch of cards. He also might want to Experimental Flight into Ginja to take out a bunch of 1-drops. He's going to choose to start with the Sally, hope to find additional discard, which he does not. But that's going to be something Berto's keeps in mind. It's only 2 Ginja in the deck, and it has to be combined with an additional card to discard Ginja. But, if Baron top decks a card like, for example, Grand Plans here, he can discard Ginja, take out the cards, and I don't actually think Grand Plans will draw here, because I think Ginja is the most expensive card in their deck, and there's not
Ninja is
anything more.
the top end.
Yeah, so it does waste Grand Plans in that Grand Plans doesn't draw a card. It does take out both cavalries, and you gotta just think about the mental damage that that's gonna do to Berto at this
Oh,
point.
absolutely.
Berto his hand is empty. Greyhound can answer Shibata with the help of an AO
Air
superiority.
superior.
He also could air superiority the type 93. He could play Greyhound air superiority type 93 not attack. These Shibatas are going to quickly bring down Baron's health total. And again, it might not look good for Baron at the moment. Or sorry, it might not look good for Berto at the moment. It looks very good for Baron at the moment. But the important thing to keep in mind is that at any point, if Baron plays this air superiority, at any point, Fiat G55 could come down as a 6/6, and that will just probably be game over. I don't see how
Mm.
Baron will find a way to answer that before it just kills him in probably 2 turns. Um, and that's what Baron is thinking about right now. He's thinking, is the last card in my opponent's hand a Fiat? Like, my opponent runs 31 1-drops. If that last card in his hand is a Fiat, um, I'm screwed. He airsubs the Type 93, but that does make this Greyhound attack a mistake because it's 1 extra damage on the Greyhound, um, which in this case will stop Berto from getting an extra 1/1 Blitzer, um, which we'll see if how big of a deal that is.
Heals the Greyhound with the Out of the Mist.
Yeah, and now Havoc will come down, and Berto can actually steal Havoc as well, and there's actually potential synergy there. And the Fiat top deck, it doesn't matter. Havoc can stick
There
on
we
the board.
go.
You slam down a 6/6, you go face, you say GG, go next. And this is the exact type of game that Berto needed. He just needed a quick answer. There's the air superiority that can come out, plus the other Havoc. He actually has the answer for it. He could trade it out with double Havoc air superiority. He does drop down to 8.
With the yeah, when he uses the air superiority, right?
You have to do it, right? If not, you're
Yeah,
taking 8 damage.
with the Greyhound, yeah. I think there's no way around clearing that Fiat. I know this is going to be painful. Like when you use the air superiority, you take another 2 ping damage from the Shibata. But I mean, what's worse, taking the 2 ping damage from the Shibata or taking the 8 from the?
Yeah, he sees it.
I think, yeah,
Takes down the Fiat. He goes down to 6 health. Sakura comes out. And now it's just going to be can Baron top deck his way out of this game. Because at the moment, his hand does, frankly, nothing.
doesn't look too great at the moment.
Ginja top deck, that takes out Greyhound.
Oh,
And it's a unit that you can play and it will stick around. That's exactly what you want. It will just stick on the board. Because you play Sally, you play Kate, they can be answered. And he chooses to just do Greyhound trade, drop the Kate. This can be answered by Out of the Mist, double Out of the Mist now if he wants.
Jakin, can you remind me real quick? Does the not that it matters now because he's clearing it, but does the Kate hit face? Does the Kate's effect?
Yes, Kate's effect
Okay.
does damage the HQ.
Yeah, I wasn't sure anymore, but
And Baron supply chain that's going to damage the Shibata. He top decks Betty. He slams it, hoping for anything but the Storm Dragon hit. It hits the Storm Dragon, and he surrenders. That is game, and that is a bounce back. If I've ever seen one, that's exactly the game
Mhm.
Birdo needed here. And
Oh, doesn't look like Berto needed Brit Air after all. At
yeah,
least not now.
I mean, maybe that's the thing he needed. Like, I mean, I'm not going to say Birdo lost game 102 because of the way he played. And certainly not game 2 at the very least. But you know that's the type of game that you need to restore your confidence. Also, just even the scoreboard. Um, and at this point, do you think this is enough to shift the momentum entirely in his favor? Or like this next game is going to be so important because this next game is the difference between a tied set or Baron having 3 shots at winning the series. So
Mm.
like obviously every game in a best of 7 is important. Every game in any series is important.
Yeah,
It's
but I think
very
especially
simple
the
to
next
say,
the
but
next match is going
yeah,
to be
game 4 of any best of 7 is always the most important match, and that's no different here. So let's do another giveaway, and yeah, we'll do after next game. We'll do a big giveaway after the next game because that's the big one. We'll do a big giveaway to celebrate the outcome of the big game. So for now, let's do a regular giveaway, which will be won by Ahmed the Edgelord. So Ahmed the Edgelord, you have won the giveaway, and I know you have. You've been around my Twitch chat since the very beginning, so congratulations on winning the giveaway. Cool that you are still here after all of these years. So now that Berto has actually won with a deck, and it wasn't his air deck, does he go back to the air deck now with the confidence that he has won with it, or does he just stay away from air? Just say air is the last deck I'm going to play. I clearly need to just play something else at the moment. How do you think Berto is going to respond?
I'm gonna say the same thing that I said before the last match. I think he's gonna bring air. Because if I look at the list, if I just compare lists, right? I still hold on to my opinion from before that uh, his best chances to win the next game are with Brit Air. I don't see his Soviet deck doing as well as Brit Air potentially into Baron's lineup or the remaining decks that Baron can bring to the next game. Um, Yeah,
That's a good point. The Soviet deck is potentially very weak to the Betty deck, just because the Soviet deck relies on big guards and Scorched Earth. But if your opponent just plays a big bomber, they don't care about your big guards or the 4 operation cost. They'll just hit you in the face
does
with the big
not
bomber
matter.
every turn in a row.
Also,
And
also Bryansk are not going to save you. Bryansk are not going to do anything.
exactly. Um, so
Tempted to say frontline, but then again, putting these decks side by side, Brit Air seems a lot better into these into the remaining decks that Baron can bring. Frontline seems a little bit too slow.
all right, so I'm letting the players know that they are good for game 4. And yeah, this with just everything on the line in this particular game, do you think Baron's going to stick on the Betty, or do you think he's going to switch to Pin? I would like him to stick on the Betty. I think Betty has a higher chance of winning. Um, and we will be finding out in a second here because we are getting straight into it. And that is a Brit versus Brit if I have ever seen one.
Okay, let's go.
Alrighty, so again, like I said with the previous Japan versus Japan, very different British decks. Of course, we have Brit Air from Berto Burrito. No air units at that opening hand. He will be full mulliganing that in a second. And this is the pin deck coming out from Baron. And this is a matchup I'm very interested in seeing. We're seeing Berto debating keeping that close air support. Baron runs Suisei in this deck, which is pin a target unit and adjacent units. And Berto Burrito runs close air support, which is buff a unit and adjacent units. Do you think the Suisei is enough of a threat that Berto places units on both sides of his HQ and loses that potential +1/+1? Or do you think he just says, you know what, you only have so many Suiseis, so you can only pin them so many turns. I would rather just get the biggest buff possible.
I personally I think that Berto is going to factor that into his decision making and play 2 units on each side of his HQ, simply because of the fact not only is he running not only is Baron running a full stack of suicides, he also has the means to send the suicide back to his hand with remind me what's the card I'm thinking of?
The
Uh
AA
the uh
Barrage.
the AA barrage, exactly, and then he can just like grab grab the deployed Susai and then use the effect again, um, next turn or even the same turn, depending on like what the positioning of Berto's units looks like.
I really
We
like
see
this
the
play.
first.
I really like this play from both players here. Berto Burrito saying, you know what, I'm just going to go face with a single unit, force you to try to like waste some of your big pin cards, and Baron responds with, you know what, Suisei is great at pinning it down all of your units. However, I'm just going to drop it with a surprise attack to take down your big card right away. You can trade out the Suisei. I don't care. I've gotten rid of your 3/5 bomber. Um, and you respond immediately with just 2 gladiators with 2 casts sitting back in hand.
Hmm.
If you're Baron, do you just
And
consider playing out a Heian here? He says no. He can delay in tactics, take the front line. That will trigger unexpected resistance, which isn't going to do much this game. It's also probably
Baron
the
doesn't.
best it's the best delay in tactics he's probably going to get. Um, and is that a float credits? Because I can't imagine he wants to AA barrage here.
No, no, he's probably gonna save the AA barrage for his suicides if he gets them. I think he's gonna try and take the front. Yeah,
And that is
and
actually it's easy to look at this Greyhound positioning and say, well, like, oh, that's just unlucky. I believe with just the way the game works that is guaranteed positioning of the Greyhound. Um, just with the way retreat works. However, I'm also not a expert on the machinations behind how retreat works, so I could be wrong about that. But either way, it does prevent the Greyhound from being buffed by the close air support, which could turn out to matter. Could be the difference between 1 or 2 damage, and with Baron playing a deck like this, the difference between 1 or 2 damage could be the difference between winning or losing a game. I imagine we're just gonna see the oh, he's looking at AA barrage. I don't hate this. I I guess you can just AA barrage, slam down he, and hope your opponent trades.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
Oh, and another Gladiator pickup. Is Berto just going to do Gladiator, Gladiator, close air support, go face? He can even throw in a sea embargo in there too.
He has the credits for it, yeah.
Picks up a Shark.
Hmm.
Now, Shark is not enough to kill Hien outright, but it is good burn from hand on a pinned board. So if he does Gladiator, Gladiator, cast, hit face, he hits face for 5, brings Baron down to 8. Um, if all 3 of his units get pinned on the following turn, he can Shark face for 3. That's not
That's
enough to end the game.
what I was about to say is like he can save the shark. Like we're probably going to see another suicide played by Baron to pin, and then if he has just one spot remaining in his front in his support line, he can just slam down the shark for 2 to 3 damage. Okay, we see the close air support on like the 3 gladiators. A 5/7 gladiator surely looks scary.
And this is just a ton of threat coming out here from Berto Burrito, and Baron just not really finding the cards to answer it. Um, he can stay alive a turn, pin the 5/7, take out the Greyhound. You'd love to get a supply shortage taking on these guys, and maybe you have to. Maybe that's the play. He's going to take out a 3/4. This conserves health. Sea Patrol top deck, I believe, is just lethal.
Yeah,
Shark,
That's
Sea
that's lethal,
Patrol
right?
face, and that is going to tie up the
Yep.
series quickly at 2-2. And like I said, Game 4, most
What a
important game in a
you
best of 7,
absolutely
and
absolutely right.
Berto ties it up 2-2. I'll update the score now so I don't forget again. Um, and
What a fast turnaround. Within like 2 games, like a matter of minutes, Berto just uh, takes the 2 wins. You're going 2-2.
and yeah, it's completely evened up. And I mean, we saw Baron get a very I guess not fast wins, but we saw Baron get some wins by the skin of his teeth in games 1 and 2, and now Berto has just clapped back with 2 very very fast wins back to back. Momentum is now entirely in his side, and looking at the 2 decks they have left, if I would rather have Berto's decks. If I had to play this best of 3 with their remaining decks, I would much rather have Berto's decks here. You have U.S. German frontline. We saw it's just the goat of Pauper. It is the deck everyone knows and loves. And then you have a Soviet control deck that is capable of crazy value. And then on Baron's side, you have 2 somewhat more experimental decks for this type of format. And it really might just come down to does the how does the research deck match into these 2 bomber heavy decks on the other side of the field? Um, and I don't actually know the answer to that question. So we will all have to find out soon. But I promised a big giveaway, so I will do a big giveaway. But first, a smaller giveaway, which will be won by none other than the Honest Druth. So the Honest Druth, you have won the regular sized giveaway. And now the winner of the large giveaway shall be Solar Flare 6041. So Solar Flare, again, another person who has been, a follower of this stream for a very long time. Congratulations on winning the big giveaway, 300 gold. So, with those giveaways, with the giveaways behind us now, and we will have more. So, if you're only here for the giveaway, which I know is probably most of you, but if you're only here for the giveaway, it can stay around. There will be more, and there will be another big giveaway as well. But with these giveaways aside, what do you bring into Game 3? If you're Baron, you've played both of your 2 remaining decks, and you've lost with both of your 2 remaining decks. Whereas Berto has not played either of these decks. His 2 remaining decks are completely untouched. So Berto is leading on momentum. He's leading with the mental at this point of just saying, like, knowing that you have lost on both of your decks already. I haven't. Like, these are fresh decks. You haven't played against them. If you're Baron, what do you bring? And again, I would like to see the Betty personally, but do you think he's just going to switch back? Do you think he prefers switching decks? What do you think the thoughts
Um,
here?
that's a difficult question because looking at these decks, I think that his British pin deck is able to completely, or like greatly, not completely, I have to be very careful with what I say here, but like greatly limit Berto's frontline deck's movement or abilities to like move around the battlefield. Like um while the Betty deck can also struggle against the frontline deck, but um is better into his Soviet deck because the Soviet deck um I mean the defense that like Berto can use against like Briansk are not going to stop bombers.
Yeah.
Um so I see I th I think Baron is going to try and get a win with a pin deck probably and on Berto's side I think he's gonna try and okay. I was gonna say frontline. I gotta be fair. I gotta be honest. I was gonna say front.
But we aren't going to see frontline. We are going to see what might be the pivotal match of this series. Which of these decks wins? Because I think if Berto wins this match, if it comes down to frontline versus the two remaining decks from Baron, I'm putting my money on Berto 100% of the time. But if this pin deck gets through against this research, two attempts on Betty, I'm leaning towards Betty. And I know it's very simple to say the winner of this match is most likely to win the series. That is just statistically accurate, regardless of decks. But I do think that these are both of these players potentially their weakest decks against each other's lineups. So we will see, which deck is going to come out on top of these very control-focused, more order-heavy decks than the more aggressive unit-based decks that we've seen up until now. So,
And don't forget that Berto now has the confidence boost that he needed to might even secure himself this win here.
and from Birdo's side, confidence is one thing. War
Oh
Machine into
my God.
War Machine is another thing when your opponent is simply playing absolutely nothing. Um, Now, again, this game is going to be decided by Baron's ability to go face with 7-4 bombers over and over and over. So what's happening now isn't necessarily that important, but if Berto could just stick a big guy, again, Berto does run a few larger units, and these 60, 30, 36th cavalries, the 6/6s that summon the 2/3/3s, that can potentially be turned into KVs, are not easy at all for Baron to remove. They get
Hmm.
through Monsoon Rods. Um, because they have multiple waves. Now we don't see any in his hand immediately, but he's going to be able to start dumping those quickly. And Baron, I like this play from Baron. He gets out the early surprise attack naval power. Now this is definitely far from this is probably the lowest priority unit in the entire deck. But one,
Yep.
it means no guards on the board for potential Heian draws later, and Berto doesn't know that there's no Heians in hand now. And two, it's just a little bit of chip damage coming through. Every
And
bit of
there we
chip
see the
damage
first
is one fewer turn he needs to attack with Lancaster.
there we see the first US research card. And the second US research. Oh.
It is going to be double US research coming out from Berto Burrito.
Oh.
And I mean, you said it when we were going over the deck lists.
Yeah, I know.
We might see 3 or 6 nukes, and that's still a possibility. Suisse top deck's going to make these T70s off of mobile defense accomplish essentially nothing other than healing 2 by preventing these from attacking. Now, I'm very curious if Berto just goes for double nukes, because, double nukes, 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6, that's 24, I win the game. But, your opponent does run some healing, and you need a lot of credits to get up to double nukes. And he has a lot of credits, but he doesn't have that many credits. But he can go off for the I'm forgetting the name of the penicillin, the tier 3 US research, and that's going to heal 6 and draw 4 cards. And his deck runs very little healing and no card draw, just a handful of cycle. So healing 6, draw 4 is going to be really, really good. It doesn't win him the game. It's not as flashy as nukes. But honestly, I'd kind of like to see Berto go for it here with at least one of these. And then save the other one for nukes, and you'll be able to use that to answer any Heians or Lancasters sticking on the board. Now, if you're Baron, are you forced to surprise attack the 845th? I mean, Berto runs hammers, so the 845th is getting its healing in regardless. So I guess you just swing face. You could
Yeah, I would probably go face here.
you could delay
Um,
tactics to save your guys from getting attacked, which is kind of a funny use of delaying tactics. He's going to bounce the Suisse to go for the pin surprise attack. He's just going full tempo. He's saying, you know what, you have double nukes. He sees the double nukes coming. So he says, you know what, you have that. Berto drops the firebomb, clears the board, has 2 tier 3 researches in hand, and now he will have the choice of what to do with them. And Berto actually has the credits to play double nukes before Baron can attack with the Lancaster.
Not only
Um,
does he have the credits, but he has all the time, as like Baron isn't threatening anything at the moment. Isn't
yeah, Baron,
He has a Lancaster, but that will take him a while to like.
I would have rather see the Lend-Lease come out from Baron there. You do overdraw. Um, but at this point, you've said I don't care about value. I'm just going for burn. Um, so just playing the convoy and then having to float 5 credits there is just absolutely awful. He doesn't pick up any Heians, and he would love to have a Heian right here, just for anything to play against his opponent. Um, but instead, there's nothing. His hand's just reactive. Like, he can do delaying tactics Lend-Lease now, but that's something you probably should have done last turn, and you would have had at least one more or 2 more opportunities to find a Heian. Um, this game is looking like it's headed towards Berto's direction, because if Berto doesn't play any more units, Baron can't play a naval power.
He knows that he's on a clock now.
And does Baron run
Do you
any
just
healing? There's AA barrages, which can heal without Berto without requiring Berto to have units. And there's 1 fortification in there. And
He's setting up for the Lend-Lease next turn?
yeah, he's making room in his hand. Berto also making room in his hand with Hour of Need
Oh,
dropping the first nuke. He
okay.
is
There's the
drawn, and he's just gonna go for it. I like this. You just get the damage in. Um, you know your opponent can answer it, and if Berto drops the nuke here, he can't upgrade the other research into nukes.
so you basically force him out of the playing, or he forces him out of like developing the other 2 nukes.
Yeah, and Berto doesn't draw anything. Like, if he had drawn a cavalry regiment there, obviously would have been pinned. Um, but Baron playing out the Suisse, and I like this. Get a unit on board. Your opponent runs sickles in the deck, but Berto's probably scared to damage himself at this point.
And there's the second Heian.
And Baron runs 2 Observer Cores. So if Berto just simply adds nukes to hand and passes, there's a possibility he dies from hand. Now, we see that Baron doesn't have that. And Berto, there's no world where Berto doesn't drop one of these Scorched Earths anyways, like a Briensk on the Scorched Earth.
Hmm?
But again, the question is, do you heal 6, or do you add nukes and say, I win next turn, if nothing happens?
I think he's probably going for the nukes,
Yeah, I think you go
knowing
for
that
the
the
nukes.
Bryansk will stop the
I don't think you play the Briansk, though. I think you say, like, Heian's not enough. He adds the nukes, but this is going to give... Oh, no, he's going penicillin. Okay. Okay, he decides against it. He's going for penicillin. He's not going for the nukes. He pulls out of it. Suisse goes, and this is a sign for Baron to say, okay, just slam Lancaster face. See what happens. Get some damage in. Make room in hand. And I imagine we're just going to see the firebomb come out. Hopefully he wins the 50-50 to kill the Suisse. He wins the 50-50. Milk Truck comes out as a little bit of healing, but again, he just hasn't found any of these cards that actually put threats on the board. And granted, he doesn't run a lot, because his deck's primarily built around stall and research. And he's found the stall and he's found the research. He turns the... I'm completely blanking on the name of the card. He turns the Milk Truck into a 3-cost Soviet tank, and he gets the SU, which is going to put Baron under pressure, although he's under substantially less HQ pressure than before, because now there's no more nukes. At least, yeah. He could theoretically get third Spy Ring into more nukes. looking from Baron here, do you set up the Type 94 surprise attack to take
Probably do that. Yep.
out the Bryansk? Or he could even Monsoon's, like, supply shortage Monsoon and then get Type 94 down, and then you save the surprise attack.
So the SU's gonna stay pinned for a turn.
I kind of like just going for Monsoon here. Because if a KV comes out, like if your opponent does, 36 cavalry KV, you can do naval operation, surprise attack the KV. You don't need the Monsoon Rot to answer that, and then you have 2 turns of just pin the entire board. Whereas this way, oh, he doesn't even play the supply shortage. This way, this SU is going to be a continued threat. He has to play naval operation next turn, or a Monsoon Rot. This 36th cavalry, though, Berto is looking. He knows something got reduced in Baron's hand. There was an Observer Corps played early in the game, and Lend-Lease was played for 7. Lancaster was played for 9. So Berto might be thinking, well, there's another Lancaster in hand, and I'm very close to dying.
they
Or it's this 4-cost Monsoon Rot sitting in hand.
getting the 1 damage in, and is he going to play? He's not playing the. Would have been fun to see the
We could see Monsoon Rot trade with the 6/6 pin, but more likely we're just going to see this. The Heian come out, the Suisse pins the front line. The second stand together can come out, create a KV. It will not be enough to end the game, but it will be enough to not die on board. But now Baron, if Baron just top decks a Lancaster, it's over. Mobile defense can stop the Heian, so he doesn't even necessarily need, like, Berto could go face here if he wants to. He probably won't. But he could theoretically go face here. Maybe he has to kill the Suisse. Does that change any of the numbers? I don't think Baron has a way of dealing 3 damage where he can't deal 7. He goes face, plays Scorched, plays Mobile Defense. This is an all-in play. And Baron can top deck lethal, and if he doesn't top deck lethal, he's playing Monsoon Supply.
to clear everything.
And you have to do Monsoon Supply, because if you don't, you risk dying to you risk simply dying to another stand together. Does Berto not run 3 stand togethers?
I think he was running 2. Let me check the list again.
You are correct, there's only 2, so that's both stand togethers out of the deck. So he doesn't have to worry about any burst beyond another nukes, or firebomb, which we see being picked up here. It will likely hit the Heian. Goes into the Suisse, gets a bit of burn damage in. Hammers his own T70 to make room for the KV, that the guard KV
That is a good play.
that Baron returned to hand, and Baron top decks the Lancaster, and that's game.
Ooh, what's a top deck?
And yeah, I mean, that's a huge turn of events. That was an incredibly close game. That was an incredibly tight game. Both players so close to
Absolutely.
victory. And I think it just comes down to, if Berto had added nukes to hand, we see from our perspective he would have won that game if he added nukes to hand. Obviously, from his perspective, he thinks, if I add nukes to hand and my opponent plays fortification, I probably lose this game 95% of the time. But the question is, what are the odds that he has the fortification compared to what are the odds you win the game through drawing? It's really hard to say. Obviously, they have probably not. Neither of them have probably played this matchup before. Nobody really knows exactly what's going on here, and that's what's really fun about this format, is just seeing people react, build these fun decks, and then seeing their opponents have to react on the fly somewhat to these decks. But we did see Baron taking a very, very crucial win with his British Japan deck to take a 3-2 series lead. And now it's just 2 attempts on Betty. And, I mean, two attempts on Betty's it's Betty. Like things can go really, really poorly, but things can also go
Yeah.
really, really well. We could see just Baron win on turn like 5 next game, and
It all depends on the yeah, whether you're blessed by Fortuna or not.
yeah. But let's do another giveaway. Actually, you know what? Let's do two giveaways. Let's do two giveaways here. Exclamation mark giveaway to enter the giveaway if you haven't already. Um, So the first giveaway winner is Outrider 102. So Outrider, you have won a 150 gold giveaway, and the second winner is Cursed01. So another long time. I recognize many of these names. Some of you guys I don't recognize, but make yourself known in Twitch chat, make yourself known in the Discord. I'm sure I will start recognizing you soon enough. But others of you, Outrider Cursed, longtime followers of the channel. Congratulations, guys. But that is going to be it for giveaways for now. We will have giveaways after next game. And next game is when we find out, is it going to be our first game that doesn't go to Game 7? Or do you think this is bound to go to Game 7 for the third consecutive match in a row? Do you think these players are that evenly matched?
I think we're gonna see Game 7 again. There's almost no way we're not seeing Game 7. Like these players are all so incredibly skilled, and it just shows. It just shows like the quality of the players. That the sheer fact that we've seen two Game 7s last week, both in which both Berto and Baron were involved. I think yeah, this is bound to happen.
Yeah, and I
We're
mean,
gonna see.
that's really what I love about this is, like, if this had been a best of 5, or sorry, like a best of 3, if we think about this, if this series had been a best of 3, this would have been a 2-0 Baron sweep. We would have just said, you know what, Baron won both his games 2-0, move on to the next one. But with a best of 7, we're getting such a different story. Baron takes the 2-0 lead, Brodo bounces back, wins the crucial game 4, ties up the series, and then they both bring their weakest decks. Baron wins a very close-fought match to pull ahead into the lead going into Game 6. And then regardless of what happens, either way, it tells a very different story than just simply saying 2-0, Berto got unlucky twice, we move on. Because Berto did get pretty unlucky. He got less so in Game 1. Game 2, he got incredibly unlucky.
Yeah.
And that's just what happens. But the more games you play, the less variance gets to have a, completely deciding factor on a series. Variance will typically balance out over more games, and this is why, well, one of the reasons that I like to call this tournament the most competitive tournament in cards, because just have the ability to play more games, and test out these different formats, play multiple weeks as well, not just simply one tournament, one match, one best of 3, is really, really cool. But now let's see what happens in Game 6. We'll see if this is going to be our first sort of coming out of the gates swinging, taking it in 6, and Baron pulling ahead, because again, Baron won his first match. Baron won his match against Killswitch in the previous week, so if he wins 4-2 against Berto here today, he's going to pull ahead into sole lead, and Berto will fall behind quite a bit in the tournament rankings here. But if it can be pulled back to a Game 7, anything can happen. We're going to see the US-German front line coming out here.
There we go.
And I think this is the better matchup. Berto knows he needs as many wins as possible. He keeps the 32nd, the Chocolate Boys. And we are into Game 1.
I was just gonna say, against the Betty deck, he's probably gonna go US frontline first.
Baron can go for a turn 1 Betty here. It will be immediately answered by 35T, and will probably lose him the game if he goes for it. But is he doing it? It draws him a 3 cost. I mean, it could draw him a Kate, but that's your only targeted discard in hand. So if you do that, your Kate's not going to be active to discard other things. You're not going to be able to discard, you're not going to be able to discard the Sallies. He goes for it, and just 35T, absolute huge tempo swing. Baron took a big risk on that play, and is coming up short. And
Mm.
how do you feel about this play? Do you think this was an unnecessary risk, or do you think it was worth just saying like, you know what, I win the
I
game if you don't have a tank?
So I know Baron is somebody who's like who likes taking risks. Sometimes they're instantaneously rewarded. Some other times they're just unnecessary. And I'm gonna be very careful, but I think this was rather unnecessary. Um, Knowing that like Berto runs 35 Ts, and that a 35 T on turn two is always a risk for your betties. It was rather.
Yeah, I mean, there's three 35Ts and a dive bomb in, and then there's three scout cars as well that wouldn't be able to kill Betty on that turn, but would guarantee kill Betty on the following turn.
Sure.
Just,
Completely forgot about the scout cars.
yeah, like, just the odds that Betty sticks, like, incredibly low. And a turn one Betty, you get two value trades, but, like, your value trades are into milk trucks, or not milk trucks, the chocolate boys. That
Mm.
doesn't really do much. I would just rather see the grand plan stick around, have more utility in hand. And now he's kind of in an awkward position. But with these Kates and the potential Ginja pickups, he has a lot of ways of dealing one damage, dealing with these small boards. So even though he's essentially doing nothing, I think the thing he's thinking about is whether or not to play air superiority on the 35T, just to save some damage. He is going to go for that. Berto runs California regiments, though. So if
True.
he
Which the air superiority is an excellent answer to those Californias. Which I don't know. Like, does Baron's deck have any other good answers or good ways to answer a California
I
other
mean,
than
a lot of Kate damage.
yeah, but you can't just rely on that.
Yeah, I think Baron would love to be the aggressor in this matchup. His deck is very built around being the aggressor, but unfortunately, just the way the draws have worked out, he simply is not the aggressor. If he had started with a 34th Infantry in his opening hand, um, this would be a
And
completely
maybe
different game.
true, true.
But unfortunately, he's just sort of forced to use his resources very inefficiently. Um, Berto could,
See a breakthrough here.
yeah, breakthroughs. I mean, if he's going for the breakthrough, I think he needs to scout car breakthrough, get Sherman up, I guess. He decides to just play Sherman, hit face. Baron here could drop the Dragon Slayer. I'm a little surprised he didn't drop the Dragon Slayer on the previous turn. Um, Berto is running no copies of Half Track, so it's not a worry of it just getting immediately bounced. Berto does have to answer this fairly. There is a single copy of Dive Bombing, which Berto doesn't have in hand, but Baron could be worried about that because Dive Bombing on the Dragon Slayer would be a very big tempo swing. And he's just going to go Kate, but if he goes Kate Experimental Flight on Betty, Betty isn't discarded. Betty is added, so I don't think that triggers the Kate, if I recall correctly, and it doesn't. And I
Does
think
not.
Baron
Does not.
forgets the interaction,
Hmm.
and that's just game losing.
Will this? Yeah, it doesn't look too good. Looking at the hands, Berto twice as many cards in hand as Baron at the moment. Um,
And I think we're going to see the breakthrough here, maybe. Maybe not. At this point, how does Berto lose this game? Um, like if your
that's the
opponent makes
question.
that play, very clearly they don't have Ginja. Um, but at the same time, you don't want to just dump all of your cards on board because maybe your opponent top decks Ginja. But at the moment, it just looks like we're almost certainly headed to a game seven. Much quicker rather than sooner rather than later. Um, do you think that this is? Yeah, we just see the quick surrender coming in. Baron wants out of this game.
Yeah.
Um, and that was, I mean, it's not unexpected that U.S. German won that matchup. Um, but the method of winning, do you think this is a sign that Baron is resigned on this deck, or do you think Baron's tilted? Like, do you think that this is a sign of a mental block Baron has within the series
I
against that deck with this deck, or do you think that was simply just like one or two mistakes, a risky play, one that gets punished, one mistake, and he says, you know what? not a great hand go next unfazed.
I, I know Baron as a risk taker who's confident in his decks, and I think that he was well aware that hey, I cannot win with this deck against both of his decks, so I'll probably lose against the used frontline deck. I think it's all he has that in mind, and I think he's building on winning against Berto's Soviet Spyring deck, um, which I think in this matchup, Baron is favored.
Yeah, I have to imagine he is favored by just getting down these bombers. If we see Berto have a similar hand as the last one, where it's just War Machine into War Machine, War Machine into double nukes, I could see Baron potentially struggling to end the game fast enough because the Scorched Earths, if you just throw in one Scorched Earth in there, suddenly things are
Mhm.
very, very different. Um, but on the other hand, if Berto has a less of a crazy pop-off turn, if he's just relying on Bryansk and Scorched Earth, I could see Baron putting up enough pressure early enough that Berto just simply doesn't have the response to it.
He knows that he has to build that pressure early on. Otherwise, I mean, Berto only has so few scorched earths, right? And Bryansk are not, as I said like numerous times, Bryansk are not going to stop the bombers. Um, neither are the tanks from mobile defense. So it's only really the scorched earths that stand between him and securing himself the win in this game. And maybe the fire bombs
Yeah,
if Berto manages to get a good start with the war machines, right? And then he transitions into early fire bombs to clear Bettys, to clear Kates. Um,
yeah, that is worth pointing out. Firebomb is a very powerful card, and particularly in this matchup where most of Baron's units are pretty low health. Um, But before we get into Game 7, let's do another giveaway. Another two giveaways, in fact. Let's do a regular-sized giveaway and then a big giveaway. So, exclamation mark giveaway to join if you haven't already. For the regular-sized giveaway, we have, oh boy, Ocaranza Juan Bautista. Ocaranza Juan Bautista. I'm probably butchering that. But congratulations, you have won the regular giveaway. And then I got intimidated by the Z. I saw the Z pull up in the name and was like, that's a lot of letters. And one of them is Z. But the big giveaway is going to be going to Dan Siverlap. Siverlap? Apologies again if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Dan, you have won the big giveaway, so you can be expecting a code from me in a few hours after the stream goes down. But before the stream goes down, we have one last game to get to because this series is also headed to a Game 7. This is the third Game 7 of the tournament. I couldn't have asked for anything better. I will let the players know that it is time for them to go. And, I mean, there's no questions about decks. They only have one left. And here we are going into the mulligan. And, okay, Baron's going first, and that's what he wants. From Berto's side, he has the War Machine. Baron's just slamming the keep. Berto's
he
spending a lot
probably
more
also.
time thinking. He's almost certainly sending back this cavalry. And
I think he's hesitant on keeping the confusion because of the Bettys, right? Um,
yeah, there's a world where you could get, like, with a 34th in the front line, you can do confusion, attack for 0 op, stand together. He chooses to keep the confusion, and here we go. Baron going for the turn 1 Betty once again. He says, you know what, it didn't work out last time. We'll do it again. Berto runs 3 copies of Bloody Sickle in his deck. So this is absolutely not a play without a ton of risk. Now, granted, there is less risk, and also he's in the rest of his hand is less punishing if the risk gets punished. So this is not nearly as crazy of a situation as last game. But if you're Berto, you're probably pretty tilted. Just seeing the turn 1 Betty coming down, anytime a 1 health unit comes down with such disrespect and you're playing a Soviet
Oh,
deck, it's pretty feels bad, man. Berto can answer it with the confusion that he kept. It won't get the Greyhound off the board, but it will get this 4 attack bomber. It will stop this 4 attack bomber from continuing to hit him in the face. Um, Problem is, Baron probably just responds by slamming down a lightning. And the lightning can get blocked by a Bryansk, but the lightning will be forcing Berto to play the Bryansk on Berto's turn 4 with 5 credits. Will stop the War Bonds, which he'd rather be playing. Um, and also, it will not stop a potential Havoc from Baron coming out and hitting face for 4. Now, we see Baron doesn't have any Havocs, but again, Berto doesn't know that. So Berto is going to actually favor killing the Firebomb, which leaves Greyhound around for an additional turn. And Baron's setting himself up for just ripping the Betty again. And we saw him discard Storm Dragon in the last game. We see him discard Storm Dragon again. That's not what he wants to see. And is this going to be a case of draw last? Or is he going to actually save? He's going to hold on to the
I think he's gonna save them.
supply chains. He discards a Grand Plan. Not what you want to see. And Berto doesn't have a Scorched Earth. He does have cards to play for sure, though. He decides to go for the ramp rather than hammering the Greyhound. So this 4 attack can go face. The Havoc top deck means that that is an additional 3 damage face. So
Oh,
that's Berto going down to 5 health. The Kate top deck is not doing anything immediately, but if this 34th sticks around, particularly if a Scorched Earth comes out, Betty, an extra Betty getting thrown onto the board. Mobile defense does nothing. Hammer does nothing. It looks like this is just game over.
this
There's nothing Berto can
really,
do, and he
really
throws
unfortunate.
in the towel. And we see Baron taking an incredible
Uh,
amount of risk in game 6, and it does not pay off. And you know what? He says we'll just do it again. And props to him. Like it's so easy to look at that and just say like, oh, he didn't play around Sickle. He should have lost. It's not that Baron doesn't know that Sickle is in Berto's deck. It's not that Baron's unaware that Bloody Sickle kills Betty. Baron is just saying, I saw you keep 3 cards. I think that's going to be War Machine, maybe Scorched Earth, maybe Bryansk. I think you're less likely to keep a Sickle. There's only 3 of them in the deck. That's not 4. You don't have any answer other than them. I don't have a better play on turn 1. I'm just going to do it, and if it works, I win. And if it doesn't work, we figure things out from there. I didn't have that many other choices. And the risk pays off. The
and
draws find themselves, and the bombers hit face through the guards.
and that's exactly what I was getting at earlier when I said like he's a risk taker. He loves taking those risks. And as you can see, more often than not, for good for him, more often than not, they are extremely rewarding.
Yeah, and we saw actually a very similar outcome from the. We saw a very similar outcome in the match against Killswitch, where it was like very back and forth, a very back and forth series. It went to game 7, and then game 7 was just Baron stomping Soviet control with an aggressive deck. And this is a very similar outcome that we saw here. It's a very close matchup. We get into game 7, and then it's just a much more fast-paced, aggressive deck that's taking some risks in the play style, taking some risks in the deck building, and just coming out over top a bit more slower, a bit more controlling Soviet-style deck. And Soviets haven't been performing particularly great at this tournament. I have to say. Now, there's not a huge sample size, but this is Baron taking a absolutely massive win. And now, if we come over and take a look at our scoreboard, this is, of course, the results after week 1. And if we refresh it, we can see the new results. Berto only -1 from that series. So again, Berto has made it to 2 best of 7s. So even though he's lost 2 sets, normally if this was just on match wins, he would be completely out of the tournament. Like, you lose 2 sets, you have no hope of making it into the top 2. However, because this is based on games, the game's difference, game win-loss difference, rather than simply just sets, Berto's still in it because Berto has been very competitive in both of his sets, and in his game or his week 3 match, he will be playing against Killswitch. And if he just stomps Killswitch, for example, like he 4-0s Killswitch, that's a 5-point swing. He goes up to +3, and suddenly, he might squeak into that into that second place finish. On the other side, you can lose points. Baron's at 4 now, but if Baron gets absolutely crushed in week 3, Baron can drop as many as 4 points back down to 0. So this entire series is very much still in the play. But the fact that they need these more dominant wins, Berto needs a more dominant win to stay in it, and Baron might not necessarily need to win his third week match, but rather just place enough wins. Might see a difference in their deck building strategies. Maybe Berto brings more riskier decks. Maybe he tries harder to hard counter a specific lineup that he thinks Killswitch might bring, just so he can dominate the series. And on the other side, Baron might just simply put all of his good cards into like 3 or 4 decks and then bring one weak deck with the knowledge that I never have to win with the weak deck. I just need to win 2 or 3 games with the good decks, and then I'm guaranteed into the finals. But
Mm-hmm.
again, if anybody wins all 3 of their matches, they get a bonus. They get a advantage in the finals. They have to win one fewer set. They essentially get a free win in the finals if you win all 3 series. So Baron, of course, is a competitive player. I imagine he's going to be coming into week 3 um, with the same amount of desire to win as he has had in week 2 and week 1, and that's worked for him so far. Let's see if it works for him again. Yeah, what do you have to say about this set? Because this was absolutely wild. This was an amazing time to watch. I hope you had a
Especially,
great time.
especially the last game was so both entertaining in a sense of like it was rather like I knew it was gonna end quick either way, but it like that fast. I wasn't expecting the game to end that fast. Um, but this is at the end of the day, this is cards, and like a lot of things can still happen in the next few weeks, right? So um, Berto like rather unfortunate here, but it's not over for him. He can just like win in the next 2 weeks, right? And then just like find himself on the top of the leaderboard. If depending on how Baron's games are going and Baron's bubbles and Killswitch's games are going.
Yeah,
So
and like he's certainly far from mathematically out of this, and just the way things have gone. If Killswitch beats Bubbles, say 4-3, it goes to game 7, Killswitch takes it over Bubbles, that will end with Bubbles and Killswitch both on 1 point. So it will be 4-1-1 -2, which looks pretty bad for Berto, but going into week 3, Berto wins a strong set. Say he gets +4, he goes up to 2, and then Baron crushes his opponent, which will be Bubbles. Bubbles drops down, and if Berto beats Killswitch, then that's just simply it. Berto makes it back in, despite losing his first 2 series. So again, the fact that Berto has been able to stick so close in these best of 7s, the fact that he hasn't won anything yet doesn't mean as much as you might think. And again, that's why I say this is the most competitive series in cards, because you can very easily point at some of these games and say, well, Berto got really unlucky here. Berto, should have won this game, and if he should have won enough games, then he should have won a set. And things just don't work out that way. It's a card game. But the fact that
exactly.
every game matters is so important for Berto to stay in this, and it's actually like completely not unreasonable for Berto to come back in this. The thing he definitely wants to see from the match tomorrow is Killswitch beating out Bubbles. He definitely wants to see nobody else joining Baron at the top there at 4+ points. He definitely wants to see those 2 players in the middle equal it out to give him an opportunity. But that is going to be it for the games here. We are going to do another 2 giveaways to celebrate a third amazing best of 7 here. So let's do another standard giveaway and another big giveaway. So for the first standard giveaway, or the standard giveaway, we have Washabana. So Washabana, you have won the standard giveaway. And the large giveaway will be going to Spellbreaker77. I've definitely, now I know for sure Spellbreaker77. I'm pretty sure you're the guy. There's a Spellbreaker on the cards ladder who's been doing quite well for himself, and getting it high up on ladder. So, maybe this 300 gold going your way will help you fill out your collection. And to everybody who has won the giveaway, make sure your Twitch whispers are on, and if you think they're on, double check just to make sure, and I will be getting to those to you shortly. Now, before we head out, though, let's quickly talk about the series or the next match we have in this tournament, which is going to be Innocent Bubbles versus Killswitch, which is going to be next week. Sorry, not next week. Not next week. That's going to be tomorrow. tomorrow at 2:30 Eastern, so that's about an hour before the start time of this stream. Tomorrow there will also be the OCC, which I will also be casting. And there should be a 2-hour gap or so between the OCC finishing and the start of this stream. So don't worry, tomorrow there's going to be a lot of cards tournaments going around. So go out, buy some stacks, because there's going to be some awesome things to win. Again, there's going to be a ton of giveaways, and we will see the outcome of Innocent Bubbles versus Killswitch in the Pauper format. And I will be joined by none other than Bear Gardener on that stream. So you have that to look forward to tomorrow. And if you didn't catch part of the stream, you're coming in late, you can always subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you will see I will upload the entire VOD of the games there. So if you ever want to rewatch something or show somebody a specific clip, anything like that, check my YouTube in the hours following the tournament finishing. But other than that, thank you very much, Red Sun, for joining me for this event. It's been amazing.
Thanks for having me. It's been a blast. Thank you.
Yeah, and once again, shout out to Red Sun Stuff. Red, where can people find you?
On YouTube and on Twitch.
Yeah, feel free to link that in put that in Twitch chat now. Guys, sure. Seriously, if you don't know Red Sun, if you haven't followed him already, he's incredibly entertaining. His monthly Field Marshal videos are hilarious, and he's also a regular cards streamer. So if you'd like regular cards content streams, check him out there. He's constantly playing some very fun decks and doing viewer games as well. So if you'd like to play against some of your favorite streamers, make sure to give him a follow. And check Twitch chat in a second to get the links for all of that. But yeah, we just pull back the scoreboard here. I mean, wow, 3 game 7s, absolutely crazy. I couldn't have asked for anything less than this. It really shows just how evenly matched these players are in deck building skill, in piloting skill, and also it really shows the competitive potential in cards. This is what cards could be, and that's amazing. I'd love to see that.
I'd also want to highlight real quick that the fact that we've seen three game 7 so far, three games and three games going up to match 7 is just speaks for the quality of the players in the lineup, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
but yeah, I think that is everything that I have to say. We've said a lot of words in the last 2.5 hours. Anything you have left to say?
Make sure to tune in tomorrow. I hope to see you all there when we are watching Killswitch against Bubbles.
All right. So, thanks you everybody for winning. Congratulations to the giveaway winners. Congratulations to Baron von Glower for pulling into the lead in this tournament. Commiserations to Berto Burrito. Very close fought match. But unfortunately, he couldn't make it across the finish line, but he's still absolutely in it. So if you're cheering for Team Berto, be sure to tune in next week where we will have the final round robin week. We'll have the final pairings and find out who is going to be going to the finals. So with that, thank you very much for everybody for watching, and we will catch all of y'all in the next one.